Yo, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back. It is a brand new episode of Liam Picks Fights presents our first look. And we're talking, of course, about UFC 303. It's a pay-per-view fight week. It's international fight week. And obviously, we were all expecting Conor McGregor, the return of the Mac. But instead, what we have is a short notice light heavyweight title fight. Alex Poatan Pereira is putting that strap on the line, and he's doing it against Jiri Prochazka. They're running it back. Former champion takes on current champion. And there's a lot of, bad blood left to settle in this feud. So I'm excited to see how this one shakes out. It's a great fight on paper. And also, we've got a lot of other great fights throughout the card. It's a little bit, mishmash. It's a little bit short notice, a lot of stuff put together at the last minute, cards being adjusted, moved around. But I think that there's still betting opportunities. I think that there's still fun fights. And I'm excited to break it all down with you guys. I still have a lot of tape to do for this card. 13 fights. It's pretty labor intensive this week. I'm getting back from vacation. That's why we're a little bit late in the week for the first look, but I'm still excited to break it all down. And if you guys are new here, let's just say on the first look, we're going to give you guys our thoughts. We're going to give you guys, some analysis, some trends, some previous thoughts about these fighters. But I am going to tape this in much more depth before my conversation with Rich tomorrow. That's going down for Bets and Banter. Stay tuned for that. If you guys are new here, welcome aboard. We start always with the main event on our first look. So with the main event, we have a light heavyweight title fight I was just discussing. We have, on the one hand, Alex Poatan Pereira. He was in the middle of a press tour, I believe, in Australia. He had been posting videos of himself, working out with Tai Tuivasa, getting in some stuff with the heavyweights. And, we really knew that he was putting his hand in a number of ventures and offering his services to the UFC. And the opportunity arose. They needed somebody to step up in the absence of Conor McGregor. And what better than a light heavyweight title fight? This guy, Alex Pereira, has been putting it on the line a number of times in the middleweight division, in the light heavyweight division. A lot of his fights have been at the pay-per-view level in the UFC. They've been at the title level as well. So you're just seeing a guy that the UFC is putting a lot of faith in, a lot of stock in by saying, hey, here's the, keys to the kingdom. Here's a lot of big fights and a lot of big opportunities. And when you look at the other side, it's a vote of confidence as well in Jiri Prochazka, who was away for a while. He had the injury. He had, the title taken from him. But when you look at a guy like Jiri Prochazka, they put him in these big moments and these big opportunities, pay-per-view spots. He's gone out there and delivered in a lot of big fights, gotten performances of the night, knockouts, impressive finishes, fight to the bitter end with Glover Teixeira, was able to get the finish there. So we've seen that this guy, Jiri Prochazka, what he does very well is he continues to press until he is killed, right? He's a kill or be killed fighter in the truest sense of the word. If you go back and watch his career unfold in Rizin, in Japan, if you go back and watch his previous bouts, he was put down before, right? We knew before the UFC, you could put this guy down, and it happened, I believe, against King Mohammed Lawal. But when you look back, what you learn about a guy like Jiri Prochazka is he rematched Mohammed Lawal, right? He went out there and he had that fight again, and he was able to do better. He was able to make adjustments. He was able to approach it smarter, and he was able to go out there and get the finish. Now, obviously, King Mo Lawal is not Alex Pereira, right? They're very different challenges. It was a different time in his career as well. But when you're looking at Jiri Prochazka, it does show you this is a guy that is capable of going out there and correcting a result. He can go out there and fix his mistakes, improve on his performance, and go out there and find a way to win the fight. So that's a reason for booking him in this kind of important high stakes rematch. That's a reason for giving him this kind of opportunity. The other thing about Jiri Prochazka is, he's fought a lot of very, very quality fighters since he got to the UFC. So we just saw Volkan Ozdemir get back in the win column in impressive fashion, right? Knocking out Johnny Walker. Obviously, that's not the most distinguishing thing you could do in the light heavyweight division, but you just look at a guy like Volkan's resume overall, and I'm pulling it up right now. He's got an 8-6 record in the promotion, 4 wins by knockout. He fought for the UFC title before as well, and he is coming off of 2 straight wins, right? Beat Bogdan Guskov, who's now, I believe, 2-1 in the promotion, and he also just beat, Johnny Walker, another guy who's been a top figure in this division for a while. So you see, okay, quality win against Volkan Ozdemir. He beat CB Dalloway, Fabio Maldonado, Mohammed Lawal, Brandon Halsey, those are all, in my opinion, quasi UFC level fighters, if not UFC level fighters. These were all before he made it to the UFC. Bruno Capoloza, another guy who's had a ton of success in the PFL. Carl Albrechtsen, relevant fighters. Vadim Nemkov, another guy he was able to defeat in his run. Even looking back, Darko Stosic, another UFC level fighter. The thing that stands out about Jiri's resume, he's got a ton of fights. He's fought a lot of really high level opponents. He's still quite young, for the amount of experience that he has. So if we pull up the intangibles for a matchup like this, the reason why they're giving a challenger like Jiri Prochazka another crack is because he's coming off that big win, right? He just went out there and finished Alexander Rakic in comeback fashion, devastated him in the second round. It was a fantastic vintage Jiri performance. And when you look, he is 31 years of age. He's the much younger fighter coming into this matchup. The same thing was true the last time they fought, but you never get younger, right? It's the one thing about life. It's inevitable, right? Father time is always lurking on the other side. You're always getting just that little bit older. And you do have to wonder, for a guy like Alex Poatan Pereira, who has been put out cold before in mixed martial arts, who has been, hurt badly before in kickboxing. He's had multiple careers now in combat sports, almost all of it at the very highest levels. Cesar Almeida, right? A former opponent of his, just looked a little bit, older and weathered and a little bit inexperienced in some positions. And they've been fighting since way back in the day, right? You just look at this guy's body of work. He's been fighting quality guys for a long time. And now Alex Poatan Pereira, he's 36 years of age. He's going on 37, a few months away from his 37th birthday here. These guys are basically the same size. Obviously, Alex Pereira looks intimidating against everybody. He looks very big physically. I'd say he's a tiny bit bigger than a guy like Jiri Prochazka, but very similar size between these two guys. I think both these guys could compete just fine in the UFC's heavyweight division because of their strength, because of their natural power, because of their speed and their abilities, right? They can both go out there and mix in their skills in a variety of positions. Now, for Alex Poatan Pereira, he's learning a little bit from Kayla Harrison, right? Talking about he's going to go out there and hit some throws. He's working on his judo. His takedowns are not very sophisticated, right? The kind of guys that he's able to take down are the Israel Adesanyas of the division, guys that aren't prepared for him to wrestle, guys that are thinking of him as a kickboxer and respecting him in that way. But I really don't rate Alex's wrestling in that same way. And I thought Jiri should have went out there in that last fight and taken him down over and over and just finished the fight by getting on top of him, dominating physically, using his top pressure, and using the fact that Jiri Prochazka is exhausting to fight. He's able to just be so offensive when he's on top of people. He's able to force them to scramble, move, and he just doesn't quit on himself, right? He can be knocked out. He can be hurt. He can be finished. But the thing that we haven't really seen ever from Jiri Prochazka is him saying, I don't have it anymore. I give up, right? When he gets hurt, he finds a way to try and keep fighting. When he gets rocked, he finds a way to try and keep fighting. So I think for Alex Pereira to win this fight, he's going to need to put Jiri Prochazka to sleep again. And whether that's with that guillotine choke that he had locked up standing, or whether that's with his hands, right? He's got a thunderous left hook. I always talk about the knockout that he had in the LFA. It's one of the most harrowing knockouts you'll ever see in all of mixed martial arts, period, point blank. I know it didn't happen in the UFC, but it's a UFC level fighter. It's worth going back and rewatching. It was sickening, guys. The guy could hardly get back up for minutes at a time. It was like a scary situation on the ground. This guy, Alex Pereira, has that kind of stopping power, the death touch, so to speak. He hits people, and to quote Jeremy Stevens, they don't effing move. So when you look at this guy, I do believe that Pereira, he could win a decision here, but the way that he fights, he's not prioritizing the cards, in my opinion. He's not prioritizing the decision. He's prioritizing finishing the fight. He's prioritizing making reads and eventually hurting you with the hands, hurting you with the low kicks, compromising you physically, and putting you away with that big knockout power that he possesses. But also we have seen he's willing to attempt these submissions, in transition. So I think that you look at the Jiri Prochazka side, he would be wise to go out there, wrestle, grapple, push that pace, try and get on top of Alex. He saw in the last fight, he can achieve a takedown here. We also saw Jiri Prochazka landed meaningful strikes in that fight. The difference was Pereira was able to take the strikes a little bit better. He was able to roll with them a little better. He was able to use his defense, his recovery a little bit better. But again, as you get older, as you creep up on age, as you're dealing with some lingering injuries, he did talk about the fact that he had a toe injury, right? Conor McGregor said, I'm not fighting with injuries anymore. I'm not stepping in there when I have something to lose, like my reputation. I need to go out there and get this win, so I can't fight compromised at all. Whereas at a different point in my career where I needed the money, where I needed the financial resources, where I needed, to cozy up to my bosses and have a better business relationship, I may have said yes to these opportunities, but I'm now financially set. I don't need to do that. For Alex Pereira, he's still trying to make, the most of this star power, this opportunity that he has. And when I think about a guy like Pereira, he has nothing to lose in this fight as I see it. Obviously, he has the title to lose, so he doesn't want to lose that. Nobody wants to go out there and lose the strap. But when you just think of what happens next for Alex Pereira, win or lose in this fight, he's probably in a meaningful fight, a main event, a co-main event the next time out, no matter what. For Jiri Prochazka, he is younger here, but this could be a make or break fight for him. He's had, a lot of professional mixed martial arts bouts, and he's had some injuries outside the cage. He's had to deal with that. And this is a guy that's trying to, restake his claim as I'm the top guy in this division. But I wonder to myself, what happens to Jiri if he loses this fight? Does he have to fight down against some of these top contenders and become a gatekeeper, so to speak, until Alex moves on? That kind of deal. What happens if Jiri wins? That's the other question, right? You always want to paint out both these hypotheticals when you're thinking about a high-level elite fight where either guy has a chance. And I think that there's a lot of possibilities if a Jiri win is to transpire. Let me tell you what I mean here. You think about Jiri Prochazka going out there, winning, getting the strap. What does that set up naturally? An awesome trilogy fight, right? Everybody likes the feeling of these two guys going to stand off from each other. They seem just like they're made to fight each other. Stoic, respect, but going to go out there and really put it on the line. Look for the finish. We're not playing for points. We're playing for keeps, right? These are two guys that kind of embed that warrior code in what they do. And that's why people want to see them fight. That's why the UFC is willing to say, short notice, let's run this one again. And if it goes sideways, number one, built an excuse for Alex. Hey, you did us a favor. You stepped up on short notice. You got the bruised up toes. And all these different things going into it. Let's run it again in 6 months. And now we got another great pay-per-view to sell. That's just one thought that I had in terms of like why the UFC would run this one again. Maybe they're just running it again to make Alex the biggest star in the company. Just have him knock out Jiri every 6 months, right? But again, when I'm just thinking of the long-term business perspective, 31-year-old Jiri Prochazka, how do you have a real star-making performance? How do you really set this guy, on a championship trajectory where he's got a rocket ship strapped to his ass in terms of stardom? I think it's beating a guy like Pereira. It's overcoming the obstacles. It's overcoming the fact that you've already lost to this individual. And then you look at the betting odds, right? This is about a minus 130, minus 140 on the Alex Poatan Pereira side. You're looking at about a plus 120 on the comeback here on the underdog, Jiri Prochazka. And that is a very closely lined fight, right? So it's not like odds makers are saying, we've seen everything we need to know about this matchup the first time it happened. It's another easy knockout for the champ. They're kind of believing, hey, this is a very competitive fight. It could go either way. And I have to imagine the public is going to be betting Alex Pereira like it's a going out of business sale, right? And the reason I feel that way is when you look at a guy like Alex, number one, he keeps printing, right? He just keeps going out there, winning these fights, winning in huge moments, winning in huge opportunities, doing it on the biggest pay-per-view, stages. And on top of that, he's a very popular fighter. He's one of the most well-liked guys in the UFC right now. He's one of the most popular social media figures in the UFC right now. People know Alex Pereira. Casual fans know Alex Pereira, and much more so than a guy like Jiri Prochazka, right? So I do think that you have two guys here that both have, a lot of the elements, a lot of the material of a star, but Alex Pereira has already been at the top. He's already won the most meaningful fights of his career and a lot of these huge trilogies. And a lot of these huge fights, right? You've just seen a lot from Poatan in a short period of time, and he gets the respect that he deserves. But I do think to myself, if the odds makers are going to stand against the public here and say, we're just not giving you good odds on Jiri Prochazka to win this fight, despite the fact he got knocked out last time, it feels to me like it's a dog or pass situation, gut feeling. I also think a creative way, to look for this fight is the potential that this fight ends via submission, right? Naturally, everybody's mind is going to gravitate towards, hey, this fight should end by knockout. And listen, there's some merit to that, right? It absolutely should. Both these guys have knockout power. You see a lot of respect from the odds makers on the KO props for both these gentlemen, no doubt about that. But when you look at how this fight could play out differently than the first fight, we saw Alex Pereira attempt that guillotine standing. We saw Jiri Prochazka submit the great Glover Teixeira, a much better grappler than Alex Pereira, his disciple, his training partner, his protege, his student, right? A guy that's learned a lot from Glover Teixeira, no doubt. But this is a guy that has been, at the very highest level, able to out-grapple some very good people across the breadth of his career. And we saw Jiri Prochazka achieve a takedown the last time these guys fought. So the idea that there could be no grappling in this fight, I don't see that. I do think that there could be, both these guys potentially mixing in offensive grappling attempts in this fight, especially if somebody gets hurt. Because that's the other thing is when you've got two guys that are both this offensive, that are both going to be throwing bricks at each other's heads, we've seen both these guys get hurt badly in the UFC on multiple occasions, right? And Alex Pereira, he's been able to deal with it a little bit better so far. But as you're approaching 37 years of age, after 2 careers in combat sports, I do wonder, can he get hurt in this fight and become very vulnerable? I do think that's a possibility. So fascinating fight. I love this main event. I'm excited to watch this one go down again. I believe last time out, I picked Jiri Prochazka and got it dead wrong. And I think I'm going to go back to the well and pick Jiri Prochazka, and I might be dead wrong again, guys. All I could do is break down these fights as best I can, give you guys my sincere belief right now. If I had to bet a side, if I had to pick a side, I would roll with Jiri Prochazka, but I wouldn't do so with a great deal of confidence. There was a time where I bet 10 units on Jiri Prochazka to defeat Glover Teixeira. It was the sweat of a lifetime. I do think, overall, it was not a good bet at -200 because it was a very close fight and it played out a lot closer than I expected. But I thought Jiri would not be denied. That was what I imagined going into that fight, and I thought he fought just like that. Last time out, he was virtually asleep, right? You could call it an early stoppage. I would say, hey, fair play to him. I thought he was out. I think he said after the fact I was out, he's going to get hit. He gets hit in every fight. Like Anfor is saying, he walks into a big punch like he does every fight. But we've seen that, he walked into a big punch against Mo Lawal, rematched him, and then he beat him. Right. We saw that he walked into a big punch last time against Alexander Rakic. A lot of people bet on Alexander Rakic. A lot of people, picked Alexander Rakic. Jiri was a slight underdog in that fight. And he went out there and he got the win as well. So I'm not saying that he's going to win the fight. I'm just saying that my gut feeling is it's a dog or pass betting situation. And I, can only give you guys my honest belief. So fascinating fight. Not an easy one to call, Don't love fading a guy like Alex Poatan Pereira, but Jiri fits a lot of criteria for me. And that's just the way it is. So long-term game, I think Jiri can still win this fight, even though he lost the last one. I believe in multiple iterations of these big fights, but it's not an easy fight, I'll tell you that. Next up, guys, we got the co-main event of the evening, and it's a fascinating fight. This one is going down with Brian T-City Ortega, and he's taking on Diego Lopes. Guys, Diego Lopes is one of these fighters that is a dynamo, right? He comes onto the scene and he's gotten everybody's respect, but he had my respect when he came into the organization, right? I bet this guy plus 6XX, I can't remember what it was, plus 620, I think, plus 660 maybe, whatever the hell it was, against Movsar Evloev, excuse me. And when you look at Movsar Evloev, he's a very talented fighter, right? He's gone out there and all he does is win, win, win in this featherweight division, which is talent stacked. He's fought a pretty quality level of opposition, including Diego Lopes along the way. And I would argue that Diego Lopes, besides Arnold Allen, gave him his toughest run of anybody that he fought so far in the UFC. He had him in multiple dangerous submission attempts in that fight. And Movsar Evloev is very responsible with his grappling, right? And he does get put in submissions before. That's happened to him. But normally he's much more calm and deliberate about dealing with them. And he was really in a pretty dangerous spot there. So I look at a guy like Diego Lopes, and he's the younger guy with a ton of professional experience. He's had 30 fights. And you look at Brian Ortega, a guy I love and respect, right? I bet Brian 3 units plus 145 against Yair Rodriguez. It felt like he was calling out to me by going for that, RNC grip on his head and arm choke. Just beautiful, beautiful stuff from Brian T. City Ortega. I felt that, the public perception had swayed too hard against him. Yair Rodriguez, guys, does not have the same ground game as a guy like Diego Lopes. He's not even close, right? Can he go out there and submit a guy like Josh Emmett? Yes, he can. Does he have a dynamic guard? Yes, he does. But is it on the quality, on the scale, on the level of a guy like Diego Lopes? Certainly it is not. Diego Lopes has been training Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu since he was 5 years of age. He comes from a long line of black belts, family of black belts. These are very quality grapplers. And if I had to criticize his style, sometimes he's too willing to play jiu-jitsu in MMA. Sometimes he's too willing to go out there and try and show my guard is better than your top position. My ability to scramble is better than yours. He does have this willingness to play this dynamic game off his back. And that's what he's got to try and avoid here against Brian T. City Ortega in all likelihood. And the reason being is Brian is a very proficient top player. We've seen that many times throughout his career. But also we've seen that Brian is a guy that can be very opportunistic with his submissions. He's got long limbs. He's got a long frame. He has sensational entries on his guillotine, as well as his triangle, right? T-City, he's known for his triangle. Both these guys have some of the best triangles in all the UFC, right? Much less the featherweight division. These guys have some of the best triangle chokes in all of the UFC, the two of them. And when you look at Diego Lopes, he prefers that triangle armbar series. A lot of what you see from T-City is just locking up those long limbs around the triangle choke and having his opponents, rendered defenseless there. He's a fantastic Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu player. So I want to give both these guys the credit and respect that they deserve. But I do think if I had to highlight a difference that I see between these two guys, it is the durability on paper between the two of these fighters. And the reason I say that is because Brian Ortega had me sweating, right? Last time out, I bet him against Yair Rodriguez, and I think skill for skill, he is better than Yair. But what was terrifying about the bout is that he's jumping up and down, and we're seeing, a guy who's warming up for a UFC fight, right? A contest where you have to be durable by definition just to make it through these bouts. To make it through a training camp, right? And Brian Ortega, while he's jumping up and down, rolls his ankle horribly, visibly on screen. You guys can go back and rewatch it. If you guys watched it live on the night, you probably remember it too. He literally rolled his ankle so hard. And that was a bad look. So I think that for Brian, the reason he has so many fewer fights than Diego Lopes is Diego Lopes is very durable, right? And Brian has been very injury prone. He's fought, very talented fighters throughout his career, and he's taken a lot of damage. When you look at Brian's career, I would say you can basically put a pin in it, right? After the Max Holloway fight. And the reason I say that is a life-changing fight. You see that, Schnee, you're doing a little bit too much in the comments, brother. So I'm gonna just put you on timeout for 5 minutes. Just chill a little bit and come back and it's all love. But to answer the chat real quick, yes, this is a live show. That's why we got randomness in the chat. But in any case, guys, wherever we were at, we'll take a sip of the coffee and get back on track here. I think that what happened in that Max Holloway fight is he was exposed for having a very one-note game, right? At the time, his striking wasn't there. And Max Holloway like felt pity, right? He's like showing him, hey, man, put your hands up. Somebody's asking, did I dye my hair in the chat? No, I did not dye my hair. I cut my hair. I just got a haircut. Shout out to the guys over at J Cuts. Gave me the fresh hookup, like my haircut, but yeah, man, that's all. We're just chilling. No, I did not dye my hair. And I would not dye my hair. I don't think I would just rock with whatever I got. But in any case, man, what you see from a guy like Brian is he took a lot of time off, in the years that have intervened since that fight. That fight with Max Holloway was in 2018, guys. And in the intervening years, he has had 4 mixed martial arts bouts. He's 2-2 in those contests. And what I'm seeing is, Yair Rodriguez comes up twice, right? And Yair doesn't have the best grappling. Yair is also a guy that can be out wrestled, pretty routinely, I would say. It's not easy, but we did see Jeremy Stevens take him down. We've seen a number of different guys take him down over the course of his career. You look at the Volkanovski fight. The problem with that Volkanovski fight, there's nothing wrong with losing to Volk, right? Everybody can agree. It was a fantastic fight, right? He went out there and he gave Volk a great scrap. And what I have to, recognize from that is it was another title fight with a life-altering beating associated with it. And he had moments in that fight, no doubt about it. He had opportunities to win the fight, but he took a hellacious beating, and his toughness, his heart, his willingness was used against him, and he got viciously assaulted. That fight could have been stopped multiple times. Vicious ground and pound from the champion. Volkanovski, one of his all-time best performances, defended the guillotine choke. I honestly, I say this from a place of humility. Brian Ortega would dominate me in every way, every facet of jiu-jitsu. He's so much better in every position. But I think that if Brian Ortega had that guillotine to do over again, he would have changed his gripping mechanics a little bit. He was just like a little bit too high, on the chest to be keeping his arms clasped together at the elbows. It was basically like he was crowding his own work. He didn't give himself space to arch into the choke, and it's just very difficult to finish that mounted guillotine unless you either, switch to a one hand or you really re-grip or you get the arm in there. Like there's a lot of different things that he could have done to try and change that a little bit. But when you have that position locked up, and by the way, when you've already been fighting for 15 minutes and you just try and lock a hold of something, you're just trying to lock a hold of something. You're trying to squeeze. He put a good squeeze on, but the finishing mechanics just weren't quite right. And honestly, I think that's why Volk survived there. If you put a guillotine on that has perfect finishing mechanics, it doesn't matter if the guy's really tough. It doesn't matter if the guy wants to stay in there. He's going to go to sleep, right? So ultimately, there was a small mistake, made somewhere along the way. And when you look at what Brian does well, he's good in the jiu-jitsu, right? He has power in the boxing. He's gotten more creative with his striking over time, mixing in the kicks, mixing in those spinning elbows. If you guys remember that Korean Zombie performance, it was absolutely sensational. He came back as a big underdog there and won. And Matt says, he rolled his ankle and got the shit beat out of him, and then he had the dog in him, took over and finished. That's exactly right. So when you think about what happened in Brian's last fight, he had to be very tough. He had to put up with a lot of damage. And that's been a theme lately. So if you just look at how much damage he's accrued against Yair Rodriguez the first time, he gets a shoulder injury in the first round. And when you just think about the grappling sequencing of that fight, what happened? They got into a body lock exchange. There's an overhook, right? Yair's trying to basically do, pretty rudimentary basic jiu-jitsu stuff. He's trying to shoulder trap. He's trying to lock down that overhook. He's trying to put some discomfort, pressure on the arm of Ortega, and Ortega's shoulder gives out. And a lot of people called that fluky, but when you go for an offensive maneuver and the person gets injured, it's a fight. It's like that is the goal. The goal of the fight is either to incapacitate them or make them give up. So it's like if I injure you, it's not what we're aiming for, right? We don't want to see people get injured, so to speak, but you just have to like be thoughtful about, okay, in cage fighting, injuries lose you the fight, right? If I get injured so bad that I can't continue, the fight is over. So that is a winning and losing condition, right? That is how I can win and lose the fight. My health, my ability to stay healthy is a fighting skill. And so when you look at this fight, you have one guy in Diego Lopes who, when he's on the wrong side of a Movsar Evloev fight, he's still doing very well, having moments, having positions, looking for submissions, getting very close. When you look at the fight with Joe Anderson Brito, Joe Anderson Brito, guys, is a spark plug. He's got power in his hands. He can knock people out. And when you look at what Joe Anderson Brito was able to do there, he was able to get top position and then hold on for his life. He was able to just get, duck out of this choke and move my head out of this and stay on top and throw some punches. And you see that Diego Lopes, even when he's on the wrong end of an ass whooping, he's still throwing up the submissions. He's still getting after it. And he's not getting put away by guys that are finishers, by guys that are proven, powerful, big hitters. And, I think that when I'm looking at this fight, clearly Brian Ortega has fought the better quality of competition over the course of his career. But you have to try and say to yourself, okay, well, if that's true, then why is Diego Lopes favored here? And is it fair? Is that, is that possible? You look at Diego Lopes to the point, again, of our friend and four. Lopes was also gassed in the second against Evloev. Yeah, why was he gassed? He took the fight on short notice, right? So he takes a fight against a top 15 guy on short notice, and he goes out there and he competes tooth and nail the whole time. What you see about this guy, Diego Lopes, is he just has an ability to compete with anybody. So do I want to go out there and lay chalk on a guy who could get put on his back, who could get taken down, who could get dominated? Theoretically, from a control time standpoint, from a strikes landed standpoint, he could potentially be on the wrong end of that fight. But when I start running through the scenarios here, I think to myself, Brian Ortega could land a big uppercut on the feet, right? He could knock him out. He's got power. He's a big, long dude. But his striking did not look there against Yair Rodriguez. Yair Rodriguez was giving it to him, could have finished him in that first round. So he really needed to get that takedown. And the good thing for him there was that Yair Rodriguez is not only bad at wrestling, he's not good at defending jiu-jitsu positions. And that, for me, is he's very offensive off his back. But that offense leads to passing, leads to you getting put in worse situations when the other guy is a higher level than you. Sometimes it's better to be a little bit conservative with your jiu-jitsu for a second and say, hey, let's not make things worse. Let's make small, minor, incremental improvements. When you're like, I'm going to throw up a triangle no matter what, that just means against a better guy, he's going to defend the triangle, and now your legs are up in the air. You've created this path, an opening for him to pass. And I think that when you're looking at how that Yair dynamic was, once it hit the mat, it was shark versus fish. It was one guy who's got some gimmicky moves and some ability to throw up offense off his back. I said before the first time that they fought, when, by the way, I bet Yair at plus money against Ortega, I said Yair's not hopeless off his back. He could throw up a submission or two. He can get some offense of his own. And I said something that I truly believe to this day. The better jiu-jitsu player doesn't always win, right? That's not always what it's about, right? Sometimes it's about who's still fresher or, who got hurt more on the feet before we exchanged on the mat. Like, those are sometimes the dynamics in MMA that play out. And sometimes, let's say I'm an 80-20 favorite to beat you in jiu-jitsu or anything else. 20% of the time I'm losing. That's what you have to remember, is that even the better person doesn't always win. So you saw Yair Rodriguez, in my humble opinion, if I was the referee, if I had my say, if MMA was judged the way I believe in, then Yair Rodriguez submitted Brian Ortega the first time they fought. He went for an offensive jiu-jitsu position, right? And then the guy, whether it's a technical submission, whether it's a TKO via injury, what happened was a submission hold was applied, the guy got injured, and the fight was over. And I think that the likelihood of either one of these guys getting submitted, tapping out to a hold here is unlikely. I think both these guys are extremely tough. I think both these guys are savvy enough in jiu-jitsu that they're going to have an ability to hand fight, move around, create a scramble, not give up a submission, so to speak. But if somebody was more likely than the other to get, injured in a submission scenario, I think it's much more likely to be Brian Ortega, because you look at what Diego Lopes does on the ground. One, he's very offensive with leg entanglements. So he doesn't have a traditional game. There's a lot of guys that like to play, MMA meta jiu-jitsu. I try and take the back. I go for a rear naked choke. I go for body lock pass, like certain things that just become part of the MMA ethos, right? I'm going to sit in half guard, camp here, throw some elbows. Like that's how a lot of guys play the game. And you look at a guy, like Lopes, he's not doing that, right? He's either entering on leg entanglements and trying to heel hook you, rip your knee apart, go for a straight ankle. Like he's trying to be very offensive with his leg entanglements, or he's trying to, put you in a triangle armbar where it creates a dilemma. And Gavin Tucker gets a lot of grief for that fight because he went out there and went for a takedown. I think people have no idea that Gavin Tucker would have gotten knocked out instantly if that fight had stayed on the feet. Like Gavin Tucker, good fighter, but he was at the wrong point in his career. His durability had been compromised by a long career in combat. He was a little bit undersized. And he was like, let me get this guy who's explosive, powerful, and aggressive to the ground so he does not hurt me. And as soon as he went for that takedown, it was right into Lopes guard city. This guy just will attack you off his back. And I said the night of that fight, I was so impressed by his dilemma. My coach talks about it all the time. Renzo Gracie, black belt, right? Just looking at the system. How did they approach these maneuvers? If you try and put somebody who's very competent, who's very skilled, who's high level in a submission hold, they're going to figure it out. But if you put them in a dilemma, meaning a hold that leads to another hold, it's going to be very hard, even for a sophisticated grappler, to get out of that sequence, because one thing that you do to try and alleviate it leads to the other position getting worse. So let me give you the prime example, the triangle armbar. If I try and do both at the same time, neither one of them is quite as effective. But if I play the two maneuvers off of one another, I make both of them much more effective in a lot of scenarios. And what I mean by that is you see Diego Lopes start to go for that, triangle armbar series, and he's able to create a sweeping mechanism instantly. And basically, if he hadn't gotten the tap on the way over, which he did get the tap because it was so tight, he could then reset by sitting on top. And then if you want to keep fighting with your hands and want to keep trying to press and not give up to the triangle, you could always go back to the guard. You could fall back with it, but you can start to sit up in the mount in a mounted triangle and then extend the arm for the armbar. It's brutal. And a guy like Diego Lopes, because he's been doing jiu-jitsu his whole life, he's very, very fluid in a lot of those positions. And Brian Ortega, his game is obviously very good. He's extremely talented with this jiu-jitsu. He showed off a new layer, a new element last time with that head and arm choke. Oftentimes we had seen it was the guillotine, it was the triangle. He showed off that new layer with that head and arm choke. That's showing he's got his modern adaptations in jiu-jitsu. But the fact that his body's falling apart, the fact that he's 33 years of age, accepting this fight on short notice, and he's talking about the fact that he is moving up to 155 pounds. That's not what I want to hear before a big fight against a guy who has said from the very outset, I want to be a 145-pound champion. I want to fight for the belt in the featherweight division. Does that mean he's going to get there? It does not mean that. But number one, the confidence is there. Number two, Dana White always talks about what? I like guys that fight in divisions. I like guys that want to hold down a division, that want to go out there, fight, contend in a division, and not fuck with me. And in this case, Brian Ortega has earned the right to do whatever the fuck he wants in terms of weight class. He is in the back nine of his career, so to speak, at 33 years of age, a guy who talked about, I might retire at some point. I might, move on and focus on my family. I might move on and focus on big fights at 155. You just see all these what I would call red flags on Brian Ortega in terms of, hey, he is a dangerous guy. He could beat anybody in the world. We know that. But what we also know is when Brian Ortega is stepping out there, his chances of getting injured are higher than Diego Lopes. We know that based on the evidence, based on the frequency of competition, based on the fact that he got injured before his last fight. He's taking this on short notice, and he's cutting a shitload of weight. He's telling you before the fight, this is a lot of weight for me to cut. I'm doing it as a favor to the promoter. I'm saying, hey, you guys need me. I'll do this. This is the last time I'm doing this. I'm not coming back to 145. I'm going up to 155. And so at 155, Brian Ortega could win more fights. He could get back in relevant conversations, right? All these things. But we kind of have to see it to believe it, right? And instead, if he goes out there and he derails a contender in their 145-pound division, only to move on to another crowded, talent-stacked, and like log jam division at 155, I don't know. That just doesn't sound to me like what they would like to see here. So for me, when they book this fight, what the UFC is believing, I think, is what I'm believing here, which is that Diego Lopes is not going to be in for an easy fight. He's gonna have his hands full here. Brian Ortega is the real fucking deal. He's skilled everywhere. He's dangerous everywhere. But Yair Rodriguez almost had him out in the first round last time. The fight before that, he did have him out in the first round. Against Volkanovski, he arguably finished him in the third round and a couple times after that. When you look at some of the other fights, Max Holloway, it was a brutal, life-changing beating. He's fought only 4 times in professional mixed martial arts since then as a result. And I think that it's just a tough ask for Brian Ortega to come in here on short notice, deliver again another comeback, take damage, find a way to overcome adversity. For me, I think he did that last time out and he got, that experience, but I just don't know that he can continue to do that in this division. So for me, I'm going to go with the guy who I believe has a future in the featherweight division. And I think Diego Lopes has overperformed expectations every time out, right? He is a brutal, violent guy. Make no mistake about it. Whether it's Sadiq Youssef and he's trying to knock your block off, whether it's Pat Sabatini and he's trying to knock your block off again. We talked about the fact it's not the same quality of competition. But we also can talk about the fact that Diego Lopes, he was like picking with these guys, minus 150, minus 125, and he's smoking them in the first round. Bing, bang, boom, get out of here. Thanks for playing. He's plus 6XX against Movsar Evloev, and he gives him arguably his toughest fight in the UFC. Had him in a couple saved by the bell type submission scenarios. I think that this guy, Diego Lopes, at 29 years of age, with all the experience that he has, 30 professional bouts under his belt, I think this guy is ready for prime time, but I am by no means saying that Brian T. City is done. I'm not saying that, he can't win this fight. He obviously can win this fight. Talented guy, but I got to go with my gut. I got to go with my heart. I got to go with my beliefs and my analysis. And I think Diego Lopes is the more durable fighter, and I believe he's going to win this fight. Good fight, though. Great scrap, and not an easy call for me to make. Like I said, I had 3 units on Brian Ortega the last time that he fought. I really like him. I believe in him. I think this matchmaking did him no favors. I think that if they had given him a lot of other fights in the division, I would have been more bullish. But Diego Lopes is one of the few guys that I believe can match him in his jiu-jitsu, right? Last time out, I thought he had a huge jiu-jitsu advantage, and I don't think he has that here. I think it's a much more honest jiu-jitsu match. I think on the feet, it's a much more honest and competitive fight as well. So, good scrap, but give me Diego. Next up, guys, we got Roman the Caucasian Dolidze taking on the experienced Anthony Lionheart Smith. When I look at this one, I got to say, both these guys are the same age, but the fight miles, much more on Anthony Smith's side of the equation. I remember we all thought that Anthony Smith was washed. I know I certainly did. And I came on this show. I came in my articles and all these things. And I said, Anthony Smith is better than Vitor Petrino in every aspect of MMA, but he's a little bit washed, so he's going to lose the fight. And, unfortunately, that's one of those times where you sit there and look at your analysis and just kick yourself. You're like, man, how did I not, account for this, right? I said the guy's better at everything. I said he's better in all positions, but we talk ourselves into a lot of things in mixed martial arts. And I talked myself into Anthony Smith is done. He's washed. He can never win another fight. So obviously he went out and proved that wrong. But Vitor Petrino, guys, was a walking fade. And I had said that we should fade him, but it's going to be the next time. And unfortunately, I missed the fade equity. He got completely exposed. And now we're not going to have an ability to get that same number. So brutal. Lesson learned, but it was just 2 fights ago against Khalil Roundtree where he got brutally finished in the 3rd round there. Khalil knocked him out. Then you look at the Ryan Spann fight. Honestly, could have went to Spann. And that was a fight that the UFC booked because Ryan Spann was his last win, right? He had lost to Johnny Walker via decision, which kind of shows, hey, maybe the power isn't translating. If you can't knock out Johnny Walker, he's been knocked out by virtually every other top light heavyweight in the division, right? Magomed Ankalaev knocked him out twice. Volkan Ozdemir knocked him out. Corey Anderson knocked him out. Jamal Hill knocked him out. So a lot of knockout losses adding up for Johnny Walker, but he was able to defeat Anthony Lionheart Smith via decision. Magomed Ankalaev was able to go out there and take out Anthony Smith, get the finish as well. You look at the Alexander Rakic fight, another fight that he lost. It's bookending his winning streak over Ryan Spann, Jimmy Crute, and Devin Clark all in the 1st round. So all of his wins recently in the UFC have been in the 1st round, except for the split decision against Ryan Spann. And again, Ryan Spann, guys, is not a decision fighter. He does not have great cardio. He is typically finished in his losses. And I think that we, could have seen that one go the other way if Anthony Smith wasn't a commentator and didn't have a good relationship with people in the company. So I think that, Anthony, his ability to keep getting these opportunities is also in part because of his relationships with the company. He's a former middleweight. He's in his 2nd division. He's had 50 plus professional fights. He's been finished 15 times in professional mixed martial arts. He's obviously getting better over time. But you just look at a guy that he's not putting together a solid winning streak. His real body of work is only beating scrub-like fighters. And his opponent this weekend, Roman Dolidze, does not have the same amount of experience. But what he does have, he's very dangerous, right? And I think that's the thing that separates these 2 guys. I think Anthony Smith against lower level opponents, guys that are marks to the submission, especially, he can go out there and submit. That's been his bread and butter lately in the UFC. Guillotine choke against Vitor Petrino, rear naked choke against Ryan Spann the first time they fought. He got the leg kick TKO win against Jimmy Crute, and then the 1st round triangle choke against Devin Clark. So you look at this guy, Devin Clark, he's been on a terrible run lately in the UFC. Jimmy Crute not been on a good run. Ryan Spann not been on a great run. I think he got the knockout win over Dom Reyes, but not very much else to write home about in this recent run of performances. Vitor Petrino was on a hot run, so we'll give him that. But it was a guy who had no experience and really just had a huge vulnerability on the mat, and it got exposed quickly. I think that this is a weird fight. So I'll acknowledge that. I got to acknowledge also our guy, MMA line mover with the dono. I really appreciate it, brother. Smash the fucking like, he says. And I would hope that you guys all do the same. If you're watching live with us on YouTube, yes, we are live. My guy, Massey, asking if we are live. Yes, we are live, brother. And excited to be here. So when I'm looking at this, guys, I got to say, we'll address the chat real quick. Our guy, Real Fight Pick, says you're a savage for doing a show this late. We're still drinking coffee, brother. We're still making sure that we get to you guys after jiu-jitsu as well. I hit a live training session tonight, got some great rounds in. So I'm feeling inspired, fired up, and excited to talk about these matchups. But the bottom line for me is the right guy is favored here, even though he's not a natural light heavyweight. I think Roman Dolidze is the much more dangerous guy. When you look at his recent run in the UFC, I thought he could have beaten Marvin Vettori. I honestly thought he deserved the win on the night. I think it's a very close fight. But I do think that we're seeing a guy in Roman Dolidze who lost to two top middleweights, right? Nasruddin Imavov, top middleweight. You're seeing a guy in what's it called? Oh goodness, I just lost my page. Marvin Vettori, another top 10 middleweight. So he's losing to the upper echelon guys in the division when he's facing them. But against Imavov, he did have some moments, especially when Imavov gassed out late in the fight. He also showed an incredible toughness, right? He got his ass whooped in that fight, but he never showed signs of wanting to quit. He kept finding ways to compete. He kept trying to scrap. He kept trying to get in there and contend. Against Marvin Vettori, it was a close 15-minute fight. And again, I thought he could have gotten the nod, went the other way, close fight. Against Jack Hermanson, he was able to out-scramble Jack. He was able to get into the top position and just obliterate him with ground and pound. Jack had no answers. There was nothing he was going to be able to do there. It was very impressive stuff, from Roman Dolidze. And it was another example of how dangerous this guy could be. You get caught in the wrong transition with this guy, he will finish the fight. And we also saw that against Phil Hawes. What is remembered is that knockout, right? He's standing there on the feet, boom, boom, the big thudding, clubbing hooks, and just puts down Phil Hawes. And everybody says, yeah, Phil Hawes doesn't have a chin. Phil Hawes, he's not the most durable guy. All of those are fair critiques of Phil Hawes, unfortunately. But what we have to say on the other side of that equation is, let's go back. Let's rewind that footage 90 more seconds and see that, honestly, it was referee error. It was referee oversight, whatever you want to call it. I think most referees would have stopped the fight after there was a clear knee injury to Phil Hawes, a serious one at that, where Roman Dolidze, basically gets him in a leg entanglement, rips at his leg, and you can go back and watch the footage, guys. Visibly, you see his leg explode. And then Roman feels it, and like a gentleman, just lets go, right? And then Phil Hawes jumps up to his feet, and he's bouncing on his knee awkwardly and can hardly get up. Man, you just have to respect that Phil was tough enough to keep trying to go there, but your coach should have intervened, in my view. And the referee probably should have intervened. I think that was a low light for our guy, Big Dan Marigliata, if my memory is serving me. But when I think about this, man, I just say to myself, okay, Roman Dolidze capable of ripping somebody's leg apart, right? He's capable of going out there and knocking somebody out. Because if you guys go back and watch that Kyle Dawkins fight, Kyle Dawkins has been on a tear since going back to the CFFC. He was not a bad UFC fighter. He had a bunch of honest scraps in the UFC as well. And we did see that, he put Dawkins down, with a knee to the face, and I think broke his face. So Roman Dolidze, dangerous guy. Now, if you go back as far as the Laureano Staropoli fight, that's where it gets scary to bet chalk on a guy like Dolidze. And I probably wouldn't advocate doing so in this fight. When I look at the matchup, I would want to get involved on Dolidze finishing props potentially and lean into the upside of, hey, if this guy's going to win the fight and if Anthony Smith is really going to be a little bit washy, then the way that Dolidze wins this is going out there, finding a finish, beating him up, landing big shots, hurting him, tiring him out. The other thing about Smith is a lot of these wins are coming early. He looked tired against Khalil Rountree. He looked tired against Ryan Spann in that fight that went 15 minutes. And I do think that Anthony Smith, for a long time, his cardio was a huge asset. And as he gets a little bit older, as the damage accumulates, I'm just not sure that the cardio has been there in the same way lately, right? And so it's not a fight where, again, I feel extremely bullish, but when I just think about the overall body of work, Trevin Giles, if you do not knock him out, is a very difficult guy to submit. So that is the other loss for Roman Dolidze in the UFC. If you can't hurt him on the feet, Trevin Giles is just pretty competent guy I think when you look at his submission losses throughout his career, he does have 3 submission losses. It's against Gabriel Bonfim in the first round. And then you look back at Gerald Mearshart and Zach Cummings, who are both way more experienced fighters, 30 pro fights at the time that he fought both of those guys. And those guys submitted him in round 3 when he tired out, right? But if you just look at Trevin Giles, he was able to get the better of Roman Dolidze. But outside of that, Roman Dolidze beats Khadisi Ibragimov, another finish, right? And Khadisi Ibragimov has had a pretty good run outside the UFC. He beat John Alon via split decision, gross look, but he didn't have very much experience at the time. Then he loses to Trevin Giles. That was the wake-up call. I feel like we saw a much more serious and committed version of Roman Dolidze ever since then. But the other thing I want to note is the Staropoli fight is why you shouldn't just blindly lay into chalk on Dolidze here. And it's because he did nothing in that fight, right? Like he wrestled Staropoli, but Staropoli is not very good. And he just pushed him into the fence. And, that was it. Like the fight just expired with him, like wrestling him into the fence the whole time. And for me, Dolidze just doesn't offer all that much offense. So if it goes to the cards, Anthony Smith maybe could have done a little bit more. He could eke out the split decision. He's got, like I said, that commentary gig and those kind of rubs. But for me, just who's the more violent, dangerous guy? Who would I rather, avoid in a fight? Roman Dolidze. I just think he's a dangerous dude. So that's the way I see it, guys. It's a 205-pound fight. Both these guys are the same age. But I think that Roman Dolidze, a little bit less fight miles on him. And I do think he is a guy that is, always poised to go out there and hurt somebody, finish him on the feet, on the ground. And in the jiu-jitsu, I rate him in the jiu-jitsu a little bit higher than Smith personally. So I think for Smith, he could clip him on the feet, but I think he's a little too slow to clip Dolidze like that. So we'll see. We'll see. Probably a decision for Anthony Smith if he wins the fight. Next up, guys, we got Mayro Shitara Bueno Silva taking on Macy Chiasson. And these are another pair of women that are the same age, right? Both these women are 32 years of age. And obviously the bigger fighter here is Macy Chiasson. And she opened up a big underdog. A lot of people have gotten involved on the Macy Chiasson side. And I wanted to pull up the content over from our friends at Fight Numbers. Okay, so if you guys have never been here before, welcome aboard. I appreciate everybody for watching. Our show is sponsored by Fight Numbers, and Fight Numbers is a company that's trying to give MMA gamblers the tools that they need to succeed, right? And when you're looking at a fight card, right, one of the number one things you're always trying to do is ascertain what are the best odds, where can I get the right price to bet on these fighters. So talking about this fight that we're going over right now, we see that on DraftKings, Mayra Bueno Silva opens minus 238 on DraftKings Sportsbook. Okay. Now you're seeing minus 110 on Mayra Bueno Silva. So this is, minus 238 to minus 110, a massive percentage based move, right? About 70% to a 50% fight, 20% move here in the market. Massive, massive stuff. So what you have to know there is that likely some sharp money came in. And then you have to ask yourself how much sharp money came in versus how much steam accumulated, right? It's a pay-per-view fight week. People start paying attention. They go, oh, wow, look at all this money coming in. It's coming in on this dog. Should I jump in? And then they look themselves and they say, wow, she's big. She's long. She's tall. She got some assets, right? She's finished her last fight. Maybe there's something going with Macy Chiasson here. And maybe there is, right? Macy has a similar amount of professional experience, and she is the bigger woman. A lot of people expect Mayra Bueno Silva, Shitara, to go out there and win this fight. According to Tapology, about 80% of voters think she's going to get it done. And the line move tells you the opposite, right? So some sharp opinions, in all likelihood, some respected opinions came in that side, and we've seen the odds makers reflect that. However, when I look at this fight, I see two girls that haven't given me much confidence to bet on them lately. And I know that Macy Chiasson was able to go out there and get the win in her last fight against Pannie Kianzad. However, Pannie Kianzad, maybe didn't look super motivated, super fired up for that fight, handed her 7th professional loss. So she's lost many times before, but it did show a little bit of growth from Macy Chiasson. But you go back one fight before that, she was having a good fight against Irene Aldana. She looked like she was winning the fight. She looked like she was doing everything right. But what was really disappointing and disheartening for me in that kind of spot is, you see she gets hit with that body kick, right? The liver kick, the up kick to the body, and she went down like it was sniper fire. It was just a bad look. And for me, I've always felt that Macy Chiasson is a little bit flaky as a fighter. She has one loss via knockout. That was the fight against Irene Aldana. She has one loss via submission. That was against current champion Raquel Pennington. She did win a split decision against Big Norma Dumont. That's a credible win. That's one of the best aging wins for her in her career. She also beat Marion Renault via unanimous decision, Shanna Young via unanimous decision. She lost, though, to Lena Landsberg via unanimous decision. She was finished via TKO on the amateur scene by Anna Dempster back in the day, and she lost to Felicia Spencer via unanimous decision as well. So Macy has a lot of experience, but she's been beat many times. So once you're seeing this line at a pick'em price, I would no longer at all be interested in the Macy side. Plus money, I get it, right? In almost any spot, if you want to take the underdog based on upside, I'm almost always thinking to myself, hey, I can understand that. But laying chalk with Macy Chiasson, that is not something I would do personally. Based on what I've seen from her throughout her career, she has only lost to quality opponents for the most part recently. But I think the same can be said for Mayra Bueno Silva, and she's beaten some of these shared opponents, right? You go back and look, Lena Landsberg, she was able to defeat. And she was able to knee bar her. Obviously, Lena Landsberg a little bit older in her career at that point, but that was a common opponent. She was able to get the win. Then you see Raquel Pennington. Yes, she was able to dominate. Yes, she was able to beat Mayra Bueno Silva, and Bueno Silva was not very impressive at all in that fight. But she claims that she was sick for whatever that's worth, and she did look a little bit flat. She also did not get finished in that fight. So we saw Macy Chiasson got finished. She got overwhelmed. She got defeated by Raquel Pennington, and Raquel Pennington was able to win the fight, but she did not impress altogether against Mayra Bueno Silva. It was kind of just a stinker of a fight for both ladies, and Mayra spent a little bit too much time hanging out on her back, and that's the danger with laying chalk with Mayra Bueno Silva, right? Her optics and decisions aren't always great. Her cardio is not always great. Her ability to fight hard for 15 minutes, I think it's there, but her ability to fight hard for 25 minutes, I mean, man, it was not there at all. And, it does call into question, hey, in this 15-minute contest, how is she going to do? Is she going to look good, or is she going to struggle? Yet to be seen, right? She gave Manon Fiorot one of her more honest fights in the promotion. So I think that's worth bringing up. She beat Yanan Wu, but that was not an impressive fight. She beat Stephanie Egger. There was some controversy attached there. And she finished Holly Holm, but she tested positive, I think, for ADHD metabolites or some BS like that. So I think that there's not really much that I would hold against her from that, list. But then you look back, Marina Moroz, draw with Montana De La Rosa. There's just been some reasons to say, hey, this girl at chalk is not super trustworthy. She's 5-3 in the UFC, winning more than she's losing. No wins via knockout in the UFC, just one via knockout in her career. But she does hit with some power. She does have an ability to win fights. And the other thing you got to say, she did submit Jillian Robertson in the first round. She submitted Mara Barella in the first round. She submitted Stephanie Egger, an ADCC competitor. Controversy or not, in the first round. She submitted common opponent Lena Landsberg, who has a win over Macy Chiasson in the second round. So I think that the girl who's a little bit more likely to capitulate and quit in this fight is Macy Chiasson. And for that reason, I'm going to pick Mayra Bueno Silva to win this fight. However, it's a competitive enough fight that if it goes the distance, I would not be surprised at all if they're raising Macy's hand, if she got a little bit more top time, if she gets the win like that. But I think on the feet, Bueno Silva, is going to come out with a little bit more aggression, a little bit more confidence against Macy. And I also believe that if this fight hits the mat, the more dangerous submission practitioner is Mayra Bueno Silva. But again, credit to Macy where it's due. Last time out, got the submission win over Penny Kianzad. That was her second win in the UFC via submission. She has 2 wins in the UFC via stoppage with strikes. She submitted Penny Kianzad all the way back in the day. So at least she time trialed herself a little bit faster here. Her TKO wins are over Gina Mazzani and Sarah Moras. So I just think that when you look at Macy's career and how it's aged out, a lot of her wins weren't all that meaningful. Whereas when you look, her best win is Norma Dumont, I would say by far. Then you look at the Myra side, obviously it was overturned to a no contest, but Holly Holm is a former champion, quality enough win, and she finished her. Lena Landsberg, common opponent, she wins and finishes her. Stephanie Egger, quality grappler, she finishes her. So I just think that when you look, Myra is a little bit more impressive, but neither one of these women are very talented overall, even though we saw her fight for the title. I don't know that I really believe in these women because of what we've seen. In terms of Myra, it's the cardio. And in terms of Macy, it's the flaking in big fights and big opportunities and big moments. All right, guys, let's round out this main card. And we've been talking a lot, right? We are at an hour and 5 minutes here. It's 1:48 local time, and we are still just rounding out the main card. So I had a lot to say. That we were fired up for this conversation, but we will speed it up a little bit when we get to the preliminary portion. What we will not do is give short shrift to this main card opener. It's going down. It's the battle that we've all been waiting for. Ian Garry representing Ireland, right? He's going in there. Ian Machado Garry, he's representing Ireland and Brazil, and he's taking on Michael Venom Page. Michael Venom Page going to be going out there representing the UK, and it's a fascinating fight, right? It's got a lot of intrigue. It's got a lot of the elements that we saw last week, right? You see Alexander Volkov, Sergey Pavlovich. What, defined that fight in a lot of ways. The pre-fight banter, right? The idea, hey, we've trained together before. We kind of know how we both operate. And when I'm looking at this fight, I say to myself, okay, you've got a young guy in Ian Garry, and the UFC has been very careful with how they've match made Ian Garry throughout his run. They've been very strategic. He's 7-0 in the promotion. First of all, that's a fascinating a fantastic record. What's fascinating about it, he's been favored, guys, in every single fight so far in the UFC. Jordan Williams, he was favored, knocked them out in the first round after a competitive round. Darian Weeks, he was favored. He goes out there and wins a unanimous decision that was not altogether competitive. Gabe Green, he goes out there and wins a unanimous decision. Kenan Song hurt him early. Then Ian Garry rallies and blasts Kenan Song out of there in the third round. Daniel Rodriguez, who just went, tit for tat with Kelvin Gastelum for 15 minutes. And honestly, I thought got hosed on the cards. I thought that he deserved to win that fight. I know it goes down as a unanimous decision loss. I thought he deserved to win. And I thought he was the guy that, earned it in blood and cut the weight right and tried to be a professional. But in any case, Ian Garry just delivered him, right? First round knockout, head kick, just absolutely read him like a book. Said, hey, you want to box with me? Hold this head kick and put him down. Then you look at the Neil Magny fight. And the thing that pissed me off about that fight is that Ian Machado Garry could have finished that fight any time that he wanted to from round 1 to round 3, I felt. He was very passive at times. He was very conservative. He threw the low kicks. He did everything he needed to do to win. He dominated the fight. It was not close nor competitive nor interesting. And right at the end, he jumps on top and looks like he could have submitted Neil Magny at any point in that fight if he had wanted to. And he started going for a head and arm choke and the clock runs out. And I was like, man, that was frustrating because I like to see guys go out there and finish. But Ian Garry, love him or hate him, he's very strategic with his career as well. He doesn't mind going out there and getting minutes. He knows, hey, I don't have as many fights as some of these guys. I don't have as much experience. So what I do is I go out there, I earn that experience. I go out there and take my time. I let the fight materialize. I don't force the finish. I don't, not look for it, but I don't force it. I just let it materialize. And he gave Neil Magny a lot of opportunities to quit. Those low kicks had him second guessing everything that he believed in. But by the end of it, Ian Garry had asserted himself, right? The Jeff Neal fight was very close. It was competitive. But honestly, I thought Ian Garry won the fight on the night. I thought he deserved the decision. I thought it was a close but clear decision for Ian Gary. And when you look, Jeff Neal does a good job of landing some shots, being, calculated with his offense, but he wasn't able to push him. He wasn't able to corral him against the fence. He wasn't able to control him all that often. And when he did, he just wasn't able to take advantage of those moments and opportunities. He didn't do enough damage. And I thought Ian Gary just was more consistent over the course of the 15 minutes. When you look at this fight, both these guys have trained before at Team Renegade. Both these guys have put in work. And obviously, Michael Venom Page burst onto the scene, right? He comes into the UFC. He gets his first win via unanimous decision over big mouth Kevin Holland. And now he's kind of stepping up in class a little bit, right? Kevin Holland is a talented fighter, but he's a guy that's a showman. He's a guy that puts on fun fights. And we've seen multiple times that Kevin Holland at 170 maybe isn't as dynamic as he can be sometimes at 185. But the problem is at 185, he could be taken down. He could be out wrestled. He's not as physical. So we saw him at 170 achieve some takedowns, put Michael Venom Page on the ground. But what he wasn't able to do was compete with him on the feet. And Kevin wanted to box. Kevin wanted to land his, his strikes. He wanted to be long with his hands. And ultimately, that just wasn't the style that was going to get it done against Michael Page. He's got good head movement. He's got a good ability to move off the center. And he just made him miss a lot when he was trying to box with him. And when you're looking at a guy like MVP, he's got good footwork. He's evasive. He's got pretty good head movement as well. But we have seen that there are ways to get to Michael Venom Page. First and foremost, you could try and take him down. We've seen guys have success taking him down, putting him on the ground, putting him in uncomfortable situations. I think that Ian Gary's ground game has always been underrated. I said that I thought he could submit Neil Magny, right? And I thought he could have submitted Neil Magny. I was frustrated that he didn't submit Neil Magny. But the skills, I believe, are there. And the reason I believe that is because I've watched his old Cage Warriors fights. And when you watch this guy, you always have to worry, is he really good at grappling, or is it just because he's in Cage Warriors? But I think that we've seen in the glimpses from him in the UFC that his grappling does translate when he needs to use it. His leverage, his height, his ability to get tight body locks, all of that translates. And when you're looking at this guy, Michael Venom Page, the guys that have had a lot of success have typically wrestled with him, have taken him down, have put him in some bad situations. Paul Daly was able to get a couple rounds off him, was able to out-wrestle him a little bit. Douglas Lima was able to kick him off his feet and then knock him out, right? So we'll come back to that result. Then Logan Storley gets the split decision win. He was able to out-wrestle him. Kevin Holland looked like if he had had a more wrestling-heavy game plan, he could have defeated Michael Venom Page, but he is too prideful, right? He is too much of I'm going to go out there and slug it out on the feet. I'm going to go out there and put on a show. I'm not going to be the one who puts on a boring fight. I'm not going to have Dana White say my fights suck. So if you look at Ian Gary, I don't think he concerns himself very much with what people say. As crazy as, that sounds, right? I think that he's trying to just craft for himself a career in fighting. And the way you do that is you take the right fights at the right time. This is a tough fight. This is not an easy fight at all. But when you're looking at the guys that are at the top of this division, big names, Michael Venom Page represents a huge opportunity. People respect him. He has a great record on paper. Fantastic, right? He's lost 2 fights as a professional MMA fighter, 1 split decision and 1 knockout. He's got a great record. But then you look at the fact that he lost a majority decision in a bare knuckle boxing match against Mike Perry. And you say to yourself, okay, like he's a human being. He's mortal. He can go out there and he could be hurt. He can get landed on, lose his equilibrium, right? So I saw a guy who's got a granite chin last time in Kevin Holland take the big shots from Michael Venom Page and keep pushing forward. I do think that capping service makes a valid point here. MVP KO plus 500. Hey, I get why people will be interested in that. But I truly believe that if Ian Gary decides this fight's not going to take place on the feet, then this fight will not take place on the feet. I believe he can out-wrestle Michael Page across the board. I think he's a better wrestler. I think he's a better grappler. And I believe that would be shown if they wrestle and grapple. Now, if he decides to strike with him, it's going to be a harder fight. It's going to be a fight where MVP has a little more room to be creative. MVP has a little bit more room to get off on his offense. And we mentioned the fact Kenan Song was able to buzz Ian Gary, right? Jordan Williams was able to land some shots on Ian Gary. So it's not like his defense is perfect at all times. But you have a much younger man here in Ian Gary whose recoverability has been, notable, right? He was able to recover when he got rocked by Kenan Song, though he was in some danger. But also, he's a guy that's defense has been improving over the course of his career. He's a guy that is getting better at using the clinch to his advantage. And I think that when you have a guy like MVP, he's going to be a little conservative because he does not want to get taken down. I truly believe that. And I believe that because in part, the Kevin Holland fight, he had opportunities to finish there, but he did not want to overextend and force himself into those scenarios where his opponent can grab a hold of him. He's very fleet of foot, right? He's very upright in his stance. He darts in and out of range, but all of that also leaves him exposed when he blitzes in, when he goes for his offense, when he jumps for a flying knee for reactive takedowns. And I do think that, Ian Gary is not a Division I All-American or something like this. I don't think you need to be, right? Paul Daly ain't a fucking wrestler, but he knew for my life, for my health and safety, I should try and wrestle this guy. And he was able to get some takedowns. And so I do think that if Ian Gary is able to get the fight to the ground, it is not about the takedown per se, right? He could take him off his feet with a low kick. That's how Douglas Lima was able to get him down, right? When you look at the being long and elusive and bouncing in and out with your footwork, it does leave your legs at times there to be cracked. And when you've seen guys lose that are high-level footwork guys, and I'm not trying to compare the striking prowess in terms of the offensive violent output of Dominic Cruz and Michael Venom Page, but what I am trying to say is, how did guys address the fact that Dominic Cruz had really good footwork and he was dancing around them and he was making them miss? They just started punting the shit out of his legs as hard as they could. And I think that Ian Gary is a smart fighter. I think he's going to go out there with every intention to punt the legs of MVP as much as possible. And then if MVP decides to come into him because he is sick of getting punted at the legs, then Ian Gary will try and take him down. And I think he will have success doing so. So for me, that's the way I see this one going. But I could be wrong. Right. So shout out to my guy. Capping Service says Gary decided to strike with everyone in the UFC so far. To be fair, I'm on under 2.5 plus 185 because I factor in Gary, KO, and Matt Malling /sub. I do think that is reasonable. I don't hate that look at all. I think that this fight ends inside the distance more often than not. But I would also say that, I could see Gary being very patient, and picking his way to a decision here, like I mentioned with the low kicks, with the jab, just saying, hey, let's make this a fight about who is more fundamental. And you could beat MVP by doing that, right? I think that when the fight becomes who's more creative, who's more dynamic, that's how you can lose the fight. So for me, it's all about, can Ian Gary stick to the fundamentals and be a real prospect? Because the real top prospects, I believe, at 170 could beat MVP, but MVP can beat anybody. Right? He's the kind of guy that's got a flashy style. He could break a skull, right? He could throw a knee at your face and break your skull. That guy could beat anybody in an MMA fight, right? I'm not going to deny that. So for me, it's an honest fight, but there's a lot of things that I like about the Gary side. He's the younger fighter here. He's coming in with a lot of, negative public perception. People don't like Ian Gary, right? They call him a cuck. They say all these things. So they're expecting, but people are fully expecting a 37-year-old to go out there and beat a 26-year-old who's never lost a fight before, who's at the top of his game, who's trained with all the best guys in the world, essentially, literally like traveled the world to get the best rounds that he could with Leon Edwards, Shavkat Rakhmonov, name a top welterweight. Ian Gary has tried to get top rounds with these guys. So I think that you see a guy in MVP who looked really good against Kevin Holland, who's a good fighter, but a journeyman guy. Right? A guy who's not cracking through that top 10 right now. A guy who's not cracking into that top 5 right now. And meanwhile, Ian Gary, everything he's done has been a calculated step forward to get me closer to the belt, to get me closer to a title opportunity, to get me closer to where I want to be in the rankings. And for me, him taking this fight is him saying, hey, I understand the assignment. I'm going to go out there and low kick this guy. I'm going to go out there and take this guy down, and I'm going to show a different layer to my game than I've had to show in these previous fights. So for me, I think we're going to see Cage Warriors Ian Garry. I think he's going back to Ireland with that purple shorts, and I think he's going to be doing it grappling. I think he's going to try and take this guy down and dominate on top. And I think whether that's a 15-minute decision, whether that's him trying to open up with ground and pound from the top position, or whether that's him pursuing submissions, I think Ian Garry has been training in Brazil because he understands the assignments against some of these top guys is not going to be enough to strike. It is not going to be enough to compete tit for tat on the feet. So you have to have a well-rounded game. I think this is the fight where he shows it. But I'm also Irish as shit, okay? I'll just tell you guys, I am biased. I bet Ian Garry in the past. I've rode the Ian Garry train. I've believed in his skills. I'll also tell you guys, I've donated before on the Ian Garry submission prop. I have done that several times before. He's not submitted somebody yet in the UFC. So you look at all those factors, and maybe I'll be wrong about this one, right? Maybe my biases are getting in the way here. However, I think MVP is a good fighter. I picked him to beat Kevin Holland via split decision last time out. I think that he deserves respect. He's a credible fighter, but he's also a guy that took a different career path. A lot of guys he fought in Bellator would not hack it in the UFC. And I don't mean that to be disrespectful. There's many guys in Bellator, PFL, all these organizations that can compete. But MVP was match made very specifically to go put on a show, to go put on these big knockouts, to get these highlight reel performances. And Ian Garry, you could say that he's had a favorable run through the UFC, but then you look and he's been in the UFC fighting guys. Many of them have stuck around at this level and had, a plethora of UFC fights, right? Daniel Rodriguez just signed another 6-fight contract. Neil Magny is a UFC lifer. You look at Jeff Neal. He's been a top 10 welterweight for a while. So Ian Garry's been going out there against tough guys, tough fights. Everybody said Jeff Neal's the guy, right? This is the guy. It was a close fight at best for Jeff Neal. Jeff Neal didn't run him over. He didn't knock him out. So another power puncher. I would say a guy who's more proven at the UFC level as a knockout threat, right? He wasn't able to knock him out. So maybe we have to give a little bit of credit to Ian Garry's defense. But also, guys, like I said, biased as shit, Irish as shit. I'm rooting for Ian Garry. I am not an Ian Garry hater, but I also am an MVP respecter. So I think it's a great fight. I think that these guys are going to slug it out. But I think that when this fight hits the mat, we're going to see a class difference. And I think Ian Machado Garry is going to have the class. Next up, we've got a prelim, and it's going down with Joe Pyfer, Body Bags Joe, taking on Power Bar Marc-Andre Barriault. And shout out to our guy Capping Services. MVP wasn't given the rub often late in his Bellator career. That's true. Durability machine, low kicker, Douglas Lima, then grappler Storley back-to-back. He definitely got Douglas on the tail end on that rematch. I still think it was a close fight, could have went either way. Then you look at how MVP has fared, just across the board. Like you said, the Storley fight, close decision. Where would Storley be in the top 10 in the UFC welterweight class? I'm not sure. So it's a good and interesting fight. But best of luck to everybody on the MVP side. I have no action on the fight yet, but I'm Irish as shit. Joe Pyfer here taking on Marc-Andre Barriault, back to the action, right? And I think Joe Pyfer is going to get the job done. I'm going to just be short and sweet about this. I don't lay chalk very often. I laid chalk foolishly, and I will acknowledge it was a bad bet on Joe Pyfer against Jack Hermanson. That was a top 15 middleweight. That was a guy, that has good proven abilities in main events as well. A guy who's gone out there and competed hard for 5 rounds with title threats like Sean Strickland. So ultimately, I just did not give Jack Hermanson enough respect going into that fight. I think I beat the closing line by 20 cents or something like that, 40 cents, but I just ultimately wasn't happy with the bet. the reason I believe that Joe Pyfer is going to win this fight is multifaceted. Number one, Marc-Andre Barriault has not beaten many ranked level fighters over the course of his career. I do think Pyfer, despite losing his last fight, could still be a ranked level fighter. The split decision loss to Chris Curtis for Marc-Andre Barriault, that was a fine look. But, he did go out there and lose that fight. Eric Anders, he beat him. Eric Anders is on the back nine of a UFC career. You look at Julian Marquez, got absolutely steamrolled by Zach Reese in his last fight. Anthony Fluffy Hernandez, really no shame in that loss, but it was a brutal beatdown for 3 rounds for MAB there. He just got the shit beaten out of him in that fight. Then Jourdain Wright. Jourdain Wright, he beats via mounted guillotine. Jourdain Wright is just not really UFC quality. Chidi Njokuani, he gets finished in the first minute in that fight. Just a brutal result for him. Beat Dalcha Lungiambula, not a very quality fighter. Beat Abu Azaitar, complete fugazi of a fighter, with all due respect. Oscar Pichota, no contest. I think he tested hot for that one. So obviously Marc-Andre Barriault will go out there and look to, make impacts. But for me, the thing about him that I don't love, he started his UFC career with 3 straight losses. That's why he got on the sauce, right? Andrew Sanchez, not a very quality fighter. A guy that washed out of the UFC. Krzysztof Jotko, that's a fair loss, and it was a split decision, so nothing to take away from that. Jotko was a pretty good fighter when he was around the UFC. And then Jun Young Park, another pretty quality fighter. But when you just start to look at the sum total of his work, he's 5-6 and 1 no contest in the UFC. And he has been an underdog 5 times, guys. He's never won before as an underdog. And I just think that the market kind of has him pegged, right? When they think he can go out there and win, he can go out there and win. When they think this guy can't hurt him, so he's going to go out there and pace him, that's kind of what happens. But in this fight, I feel the grappling advantage, if there's one to be had, goes to Pyfer. I think the power advantage goes to Pyfer. I think that the volume is what MAB would have to rely on here, but I think he's too hittable. And I think that if Pyfer is getting landed on, he could probably take him down at will. I just think Pyfer is a better wrestler. And last time he was fighting for 25 minutes, he had 15 minutes worth of cardio, right? I kind of think he's going to have 15 minutes worth of cardio again. And so if you have 15 minutes worth of cardio against MAB, you should be able to defeat him if you're, a ranked, credible guy. And I do see Pyfer that way, but we'll have to see. I do think that this is not a layup by any means, but I think when the UFC gives you a guy that's 0-5 as an underdog and been finished a bunch of times in the UFC and coming off of a loss in his home country, they're kind of saying, hey, go out there and right the ship here. And I think that Joe Pyfer is capable of doing that. So that's the way I see it. But tricky enough fight where I would definitely not be laying minus 300 with Joe Pyfer. Lesson learned there. ABCs say always bet on cardio, and MAB is king of cardio. Shout out to our guy Capping Service. He is on MAB here. I think MAB winning round 3 is as likely as Pyfer winning round 1. I'm not sure I agree there, but I get where you're coming from. I certainly see the line of reasoning, and I think MAB is probably the money line side. But for me, his trend as an underdog is not very impressive. And there's a lot of other underdogs with a little bit stronger proof of concept. Next up, guys, we got Cub Swanson taking on Andre Touchy Fili. And speaking of proven underdogs, Cub Swanson is one of them, right? He's gone out there and gotten the win as a dog many times in his career. I think he's lost a little bit more than he's won as a dog, but his ROI has been positive nonetheless. I'm trying to pull up the data and information right now so we can have a more informed conversation about this. But in any case, he's 5-7, guys, as a UFC underdog for a 15.1% ROI. So Cub Swanson has gone out there and more often than not turned a profit on your dollar. Last time out, he did defeat Hakeem Dawodu. That was part of it, right? Close fight, gets the win. I thought that fight could have went either way, but either, whether you agree with the decision or not, he goes out there and gets another underdog win in a career full of them. I believe he was favored to beat Darren Elkins. But when you go back and look, he was a dog against Daniel Pineda, won that fight. He was a dog against Kron Gracie, won that fight. He was a huge favorite against Artem Lobov when they fought, but he was a dog against Doo Ho Choi when he won that fight of the year scrap with him. ultimately, you just see this guy, Cub Swanson, has gone out there and, done a great job. I also agree with Sun MMA here. Big Cub Swanson fan, but he lost to Hakeem. I thought Hakeem deserved the win, but again, super close fight. They gave it to Cub. He's a fan favorite. He's a guy that people love to see compete inside the octagon, and he's taking on another UFC veteran, a guy who is 11-10 in the promotion, so just above 500 for Andre Touchy-Fili. Meanwhile, Cub Swanson is 14-9 in the promotion, so he has done a better job in terms of separating himself from his competition. Cub Swanson has been a credible guy, but he's 40 years of age, just 34 years of age for Andre Touchy-Fili. His birthday is during fight week, it seems. So you're seeing a guy in Andre Fili who just turned 34. He was 33 years of age. He's taken on a 40-year-old in Cub Swanson, and Cub shows, he still makes some improvements to his game, right? He's 5-7 in his career to the submission, but he showed a nice back take against Hakeem Dawodu last fight. That was huge for him winning that fight ultimately. And he has, just shown to be a fighter that continues to improve. I thought that was emblematic. I think he's gotten his black belt. He's competed in a couple of grappling matches, but his kryptonite in MMA, in the UFC level has been those damn submission holds. Got guillotined by Max Holloway, got neck cranked by Frankie Edgar, the latest submission in UFC history with like 4 or 5 seconds left in round 5. He got arm triangle choked by Ricardo Lamas. He got Renato Moicano, that's the other one. Submitted him in the first round, and Brian Ortega guillotine choke in round number 2. So Cub Swanson basically has been a mark to the submission throughout his career. Andre Fili, though, only 3 wins via submission. He has taken the back a couple times in his recent fights as well. We saw that in order to secure the decision against Bill Algeo, but he was not able to hand fight in order to get the submission finish in that fight. He has not submitted any opponent since he was on the regional scene. So you look at Andre Fili, he's basically a stand up on the feet and either, compete to a close decision, or I knock you out, you knock me out, we're going to exchange some big punches kind of deal. He's been knocked out by Dan Ige in his last fight. That was in February, earlier this year. So making a pretty quick turnaround here off a brutal knockout loss against Dan 50K Ige. He beat Lucas Almeida via first round knockout. That was impressive. Lucas Almeida just saw him bounce back against Kawamba the other night. You saw Nathaniel Wood go out there and beat Andre Fili via unanimous decision. That's not a great look because Andre Fili is an undersized guy. He used his wrestling. He was able to take down Fili, if my memory serves. Bill Algeo, they had an absolute war, close fight. He was able to take him down, take his back, and again, went to a close split decision there. Joe Anderson Brito, one of my favorite bets of all time, plus 250. Joe Anderson Brito, KO1. Easy bread, also had the ITD at plus 1,000 there. So we've seen there's been a number of times throughout his career that Andre Fili has dropped the ball as a favorite. He has not been printing you money in this favorite price tag, in this distinction. So fun scrap, good scrap. Andre Fili deserved favorite, but I just don't think I can get behind 70% indications on a guy like Andre Fili, just because, we've seen that he can lose in these big spots as a favorite. We've seen him drop the ball a number of times. Calvin Kattar in his UFC debut upset him as well. I'm just trying to think back to any other times Andre has dropped the ball. I have bet against Andre twice in the UFC. I'm 2-0 in those spots. I bet Bryce Mitchell 2 units at minus 127. Close fight. He was able to get the win there. And then I also bet Joe Anderson Brito 4 units at plus 250. So I've only ever faded Andre Fili in the UFC, personally speaking. As for Cub Swanson, I bet Cub Swanson huge against Darren Elkins. I also had him by knockout in that fight. But I bet Cub Swanson against Giga Chikadze plus 150. And he ended up getting folded up in that fight. But I just felt Cub Swanson was going to be able to go out there and compete if he did not get knocked out and finish. I thought he would have been able to push to a close competitive decision or potentially submit Giga Chikadze. And unfortunately, that wasn't able to happen. But I was able to get Giga Chikadze against Calvin Kattar, a couple fights later. So you see that long-term, there are opportunities to fade these people when they're in tough matchups. And Cub Swanson, 40 years of age, could just be the end of his road, right? He could just be a little bit too long in the tooth. He could be a little bit too slowed down at this point in his run. And Andre Fili can be dangerous, right? He looked very sharp against Daniel Pineda. If I'm remembering the fight, yeah, Daniel Pineda, he went to a accidental eye poke, no contest there. But Fili, when he's on, man, he does look very sharp on the feet. And that's what Cub Swanson will not want to be dealing with, is a guy who's fast, sharp, on point, on the money. So it's a close competitive fight for me. I'm going to lean towards Andre Fili getting it done via knockout or submission, right, inside the distance. But I also think, Cub Swanson, you don't want to count him out. You don't want to count on a guy like Cub, even though he's 40 years of age, because he's a huge fan favorite. He's a social media A-side. He's performed well as a dog. And, we see that Andre Fili, he's the kind of guy that's liable to make mistakes as a favorite. So Cub Swanson at the prime of his career was a tier above Andre Fili. And he's no longer in the prime of his career, but I'm not sure if Andre Fili is either. Both these guys have had a ton of UFC fights. And for Andre, he just hasn't performed at quite the same level. And the thing that I don't love, like I said, is that quick turnaround, guys. He just got knocked out, a few months back by Dan Ige, and he's getting right back in there. So probably wants to wash that taste out of his mouth. But, if it gets into some dangerous positions, he could regret getting back in there so quick. Next up, guys, we're going to go to the lightning round because we're already at an hour and 35 minutes here. We got Charles Jourdain versus Jean Silva. And Lord Assassin Jean Silva, the younger man, he's got way less UFC experience in this fight, but he's a dangerous guy. And he's coming from a great gym, right? He's coming out of the Fighting Nerds. He's on a 9-fight win streak entering this bout. And most of those wins come via knockout. He's got power in his hands, beat Weston Wilson, but he went to a decision with Kevin Vallejos on the Contender Series. Then we saw Kevin Vallejos go out there and get back in the win column in his own right on the regional scene. So Kevin Vallejos was an undefeated fighter. He got the win over him. Vallejos has never lost another fight, so we have to give some credit and respect there. However, when we look at the rest of his record, he's not fought the most distinguished levels of competition throughout his career. He hasn't, lost to scrubs, no doubt about that. He lost to Gabriel Schlupp, who is an undefeated fighter, currently 6-0 as a professional, and he lost to Pedro Henrique, who's 9-5-1 currently as a professional. He was 5-2 at the time, so he's won a bunch of fights since. Those were a split and unanimous decision. Now he's taking on Charles Jourdain. He's 1-2 in decision. So for me, it's a dangerous fight for him if this goes to the cards. We know that Jourdain can put up output. We know that Jourdain can go out there and land a lot of shots. And we know that Jourdain, can mix in some crazy submission attempts, right? He's got that guillotine choke that he's been working on. He's a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. But when you also look at his resume, you look at the loss to Sean Woodson, I thought that was a fight that he really could have and should have won. Ricardo Ramos, guys, Ricardo Ramos has just been going out soft lately in his fights. I don't mean to disrespect the man, but he lost the exact same fight to Julian Erosa that he lost to Charles Jourdain. So I don't know how much credit to give to Jourdain as much as we got to say, hey, that was a little bit of a sketchy look from Ricardo Ramos. Chrome Gracie has just not been looking good in his recent fights. Right? No disrespect, just hasn't been there. Hasn't looked like he's wanted to be there. Nathaniel Wood dominated him with the wrestling and grappling, took him down, beat him up on the feet. I thought that was a horrible look. I thought that was a fight that Charles should win. I think I bet Charles in that fight. And again, just the lack of grappling, the lack of physicality, he was getting thrown all over the place. I didn't like to see that. And then you look at, who he's beating, right? Andre Ewell, not really UFC quality. Lando Venata, a UFC lifer, but not a guy that's really going to move towards the top of a division, right? Chrome Gracie, just kind of a novelty fighter, with no disrespect. He's definitely competitive with some guys, right? He went out there and beat Caceres, I believe, but I just don't really see that. Then you see, the Shane Burgos split decision. That was New York Ho's job. So somebody got to the judges there. I love Shane Burgos, but that was a super, super close fight, and he was very lucky to get his hand raised in that one. And so when I look at the overall body of work, there's no real standout win for Charles Jourdain that makes me think he's head and shoulders above, Gene Silva, right? He beat Marcelo Rojo. He beat Andre Ewell. He beat Lando Venata. He beat Chrome Gracie. He beat Ricardo Ramos. and he beat Duo Choi. Those are all his UFC wins. I think, Duo Choi, probably the highest ranked among them. So that's kind of why he got some recognition right off the bat. Lost a close one to Andre Fili. Went to a split draw with Josh Kulabau. And I bet Josh Kulabau in that fight when he was a massive underdog and he dropped Jourdain in that spot. So for me, the thing that I worry about with a guy like Jourdain is he's been dropped a number of times without getting knocked out. So I always think that he's a candidate to be knocked out. Also, he's 2-6 in decisions, guys. So they found the only guy that has a worse record in decisions than Gene Silva. And I kid, but when I look at this, Gene Silva for me just feels like a more marketable fighter and the kind of guy that Dana really likes to get behind. And it's not because Charles isn't fun. He is fun. He's experienced, but he's kind of just shown where his ceiling's at. I think that a guy like Gene Silva, the way he attacked Weston Wilson, the way he was so aggressive, but also patient, right? He was landing big shots, but he wasn't forcing the finish. He just kept landing big shots, kept finding his moments to materialize. And he had a very clear, calculated message after the fight. So I think that this should be a good scrap. And I think Gene Silva is going to get the job done here. But I don't feel very bullish about it. The reason I'm going to stipulate that is the market is giving me resistance here. If this line flips and Gene Silva becomes the favorite, then I would say, hey, you know what? Fair enough. But when I think about, where we're at, it seems like Gene Silva is a popular side in the betting market this weekend, but the line has not flipped. So for me, I almost just want to see a little bit more sign of market strength, and then I would get behind the Gene Silva side. But for me, Gene Silva's the side here at plus money or pass. Good fight, good scrap, big step up. But I think that Gene Silva and the Fighting Nerds, they're ready for primetime. So let's find out. Next up, man, we got Peyton Talbott taking on Yanis Gamori in the bantamweight division. And I think Peyton Talbott's going to win this fight. I bet Yanis Gamori in his UFC debut, and I was really disappointed by what I saw. On tape, what I had thought I had seen was a guy that could go out there, land some good low kicks, compete, make it a close kickboxing fight, mix in the wrestling and grappling time to time. But what I have seen instead is, in that fight with William Gomis, I didn't like his level of offense. I didn't like his reactions to getting hit. I didn't like his demeanor. I didn't like any of it. And he accepted that fight on short notice. They tried to book him against Vinicius Lockdog Oliveira, and then he withdrew from the fight. So I believe him withdrawing from the fight is what got him booked with Peyton Talbott. And Peyton Talbott right now is one of the last guys that people want to sign to fight at 135 pounds. And it's because he's still not a household name, but he's on a 13-fight win streak, and he's extremely dangerous. When we saw that last fight with Cameron Simon, it looked like he had leveled up physically and also technically from his earlier fights. He was so aggressive in that fight. If you had ever said, like, what's the problem with Peyton Talbott's game prior to the UFC run that he's been on, you would say, you know what, this guy Peyton Talbott, he's just a little bit of a slow starter, right? He takes a little bit of time to make his reads, takes a little bit of time to get going with his hands, takes a little bit of time before he starts unloading. And last fight against Cameron Simon, he said, fuck all that. He just went forward, pursued action, got in his face, and he fucked him up. No two ways about it. He beat him up from minute one till the end. It was a bitter end. It was a brutal end. He just beat the shit out of that guy. And Cameron Simon is not a bum. Not a bad fighter. He's been buzzed before, right? He could get hurt, but he showed the toughness there. He did not want to quit. He was not looking for a way out. He just was getting mollywopped. And I do think that what we have to recognize is Talbott had gotten so much better and more aggressive from the time we had seen him previously. Nick Aguirre was able to have some success, where Nick Aguirre, I believe, was able to get on top of him in the first round. Let me just go back and check UFC stats because I haven't rewatched this fight yet. Mentioned off the top here, if you guys are just joining us, welcome. Appreciate you guys watching the show, but this is my first look, so I still have to do some tape on some of these fights, and obviously, in terms of prioritizing my tape during the week, I did not put the Talbott fight at the top of the list because Talbott is the biggest favorite on the card by a huge margin. But when you look back, Peyton Talbott has a 90% takedown defense rate, but he gave up 2 takedowns against Nick Aguirre and 1 takedown against Reyes Cortez Jr. So 3 takedowns in total in 3 UFC and Dana White Contender Series bouts. That is the liability in his game, is he can give up takedowns, he can be kicked in the leg, and he doesn't really try to defend strikes. He moves his head a little bit, but he has a great durability. And you see that in his fights. He's not afraid to pursue the fight. I watched a lot of Peyton Talbott footage before he was on Contender Series, and I've had a very good run of not only picking, but also betting on his fights. Now, I did not bet on the Cameron Simon fight, guys. That's where he really surprised me. I thought that was where the rubber was going to meet the road. I thought it was going to be very close. I thought it was going to be very competitive, and it was not, right? It was a whitewash. When you look at the fight that he had with Nick Aguirre, I said Aguirre is going to go out there and he's going to have to wrestle and grapple for his life, right? In most instances, right? He's going to have to take him down. He's going to have to get top position. And the thing that I felt was ultimately going to be Aguirre's undoing was the fact that Aguirre would slow. Peyton Talbott enforces a sickening pace in most of his fights, where if you want to wrestle him and grapple him, he's like, no problem. I'm just going to try and roll. I'm going to try and get up. I'm going to try and create a scramble. I'm going to try and do something. And you just see that there's a lot of fascinating, ability to dig in these fights and keep pushing and keep creating this pace. And when you look at the Aguirre fight, Aguirre is having some moments, right? Like I said, he got 2 takedowns. He got 5 minutes, 46 seconds of control time. But all the time when he's on top, he was being forced to work. He was being forced to move. He was being forced to scramble a little bit. And it becomes exhausting to do that. The other thing is he had to make a choice. In order to control Talbot, he just forego striking, right? 5 of 12 on significant strikes for Nick Aguirre over the course of that fight. That didn't end until the 3rd round, mind you. And total strikes, right? He went 18 of 29. So he only attempted 29 strikes in a fight that started the 3rd round. Meanwhile, Peyton Talbott attempted 90 strikes. He landed 28 of 53 significant strikes. He got 3 minutes, 25 seconds of his own control time in that fight. So essentially, he was able to turn the tables in the grappling and then submit his opponent. I cashed a plus 1,400 Talbot by submission, as well as Talbot round 3. So I was very happy with that outcome, right? Then you look at Peyton Talbot on the Contender Series, okay? And on the Contender Series, I actually laid the chalk, which, if you guys know me, I'm not a big chalk guy. I'm not a guy that is looking to get out there and lay chalk on every fighter every week. But I thought that he was going to beat Reyes Cortez, right? And he was able to go out there and do that. Reyes Cortez wanted to wrestle. He wanted to grapple. He wanted to take the fight to the ground. And we saw that Peyton Talbot, he understands that people are going to try and wrestle him and try and grapple him. And so a lot of what he does, guys, is crazy shit. Like if people pick up a single leg, he'll hit a backflip. He'll do these creative athletic escapes. I don't think that you should lay minus 2,000 in an MMA fight on anybody ever, right? I bet Yanis Kamori last time out at plus 197. Or plus 200 or whatever the fuck it was, right? I think that when you look at this fight, the money line side is obviously dog or pass, right? When you just look at, it's a mixed martial arts fight, right? What if the guy stubs his toe? What if he tears his ACL? It's just that you start to think about those questions. I think that this is a fight where Talbot is being put in a position to succeed, right? I think he's being put in a position to thrive. This was going to be a McGregor card. This was going to be a showcase, right? And International Fight Week, they take this guy Talbot, who just put on a show in the Apex in front of nobody. And they're like, let's put this guy in front of a crowd. Let's put this guy in front of a pay-per-view audience, and he's going to translate. And then they give him Yanis Kamori, who last time out goes down to a soft body kick. It was a very strange fight. And William Gomes is one of the least dangerous guys in the division, based on what we've seen from him so far. Maybe that'll change at some point in his career, but that's just what we know about him so far. And I think that for Peyton Talbot, he's proving himself to be not only that threat to implement a heavy pace in rounds 2 and 3, but he could have gotten a first round knockout against a quality prospect in his last fight. And he's got power in his hands. He's not afraid at all to stand and commit in the pocket. He can throw hard, crispy low kicks as well if he decides to. And he's just very athletic. So for me, he's the better archetype. He's the better athlete, and I prefer his style as well. I don't think it's a fight where, Gamorti has no chance. He's got more professional experience. But Talbott's the younger fighter here. He's going to be the bigger fighter here by an inch in height and reach. And I think that he's the more talented guy. I think he's going further. I think he's a better fighter. I think he wins. But it's not a fight where I would lay his money line price. I think it's going to be another Peyton Talbott highlight reel. I'll just leave it there. And next up, folks, we've got Michelle Waterson-Gomez taking on Jillian Robertson in the women's strawweight division. And this is a fight where, Michelle Waterson-Gomez, not been a profitable underdog. She's really been struggling in her UFC career. She is now 6-8 within her UFC run. And she got knocked out brutally last time out by Marina Rodriguez, finished with punches from the mount. Luana Pinheiro defeated her via split decision. I bet Michelle Waterson in that fight at plus 145. I did think that she won that fight, but it was very close. It was very competitive. And, when I'm looking at the next fight on this list was Amanda Lemos. She did appear to be competitive in the first round in that fight, but the power, the athleticism gap, again, was a huge differentiator, and she got submitted, which is concerning going against somebody talented on the mat like Jillian Robertson here. Then you look back, she lost a unanimous decision to Marina Rodriguez, so they made her fight her again, right? It was a rematch. She lost to Carla Esparza, close split decision. She beat Angela Hill in a close split decision. Guys, I'm not sure she won that fight. Right. So she could easily be on a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 fight losing streak with a couple canceled bouts along the way. She pulled out via injury from a Amanda Hebos bout that was scheduled not once, but twice, in January of 2021 and then again in March of 2022. So I don't know where Michelle Waterson is at. I think that she has the ability to go out there and potentially win this fight if she's able to sting Jillian Robertson on the feet, or if she's able to sprawl, brawl, keep it upright for the whole 15 minutes. If this fight hits the mat, I think Jillian Robertson probably wins it, because I do think she has the capability to land serious ground and pound. Shout out to Moy, says, don't fall for the BS narrative. Jillian needs a takedown to win. She can still get the sub without the takedown. That's true. But also, if she does get the takedown, Moyes, we've seen a couple women now beat the shit out of, Karate Hottie from that bottom position. So for me, I do think that there is a possibility either one of these women could finish, which I will say sounds controversial, but just the one thing about Jillian Robertson that I don't love is we have seen her just kind of wilt up sometimes when the fight's not going her way. She only has 2 stoppage losses, and they're both fairly justifiable. She got punched out by Macy Barber in the first round, just getting thrown around, bullied physically in that fight. And she got submitted via armbar in the first round against Mayra Bueno Silva. So again, we can say, hey, those are 2 respectable losses. Nothing to take away from. She has not been finished in a very long time since, but she has dropped decisions to the likes of Tabitha Ricci, JJ Aldrich, Miranda Maverick, Talia Santos. She's just been very competitive with a lot of top girls. When she wins, she tends to be a finisher, right? She armbarred Piera Rodriguez. She finished Polyana Viena with strikes from the top position. She will always be my girl for that, right? I cashed nicely on Jillian Robertson KO. Jillian Robertson KO 2. She said, I want to go out there and get the KO in my hometown, in my backyard in Canada. And, this is a girl in Jillian Robertson who has just shown a ability to finish fights. So against an older opponent who's been on a terrible run, I do think Jillian is probably going to get the win here and the finish. But I have to just say, if this fight goes to the cards, that would probably tell me something could have gone wrong along the way. And I just wouldn't be surprised if the kiaing and, pity party of Michelle Waterson was able to get her a split decision. But I thought that before against Pinheiro, and I was proven wrong there. So we will have to wait and see on that one. But for me, just Jillian Robertson coming into her own, I think this is a winnable fight for her. I think she's going to get the win and probably the finish. Next up, guys, we got Andre Arlovski taking on Martin Buday. I made a note after his last fight that it looked like Martin Buday was going to get on strength and conditioning programs. And for me, that just seemed like he was probably going to get on a cycle of steroids after getting his ass whooped. And I think that was the right idea. He's a former professional video game player, as best I understand. So it's a good idea for him to get sauced up, get athletic as he can, because he just looked unathletic against Shamil Gaziev, who was a former Dagestan volleyball player. And you don't normally think of volleyball player as the toughest guy in the room. Holy smokes. He was way more athletic than Buday, and it showed early on. The thing is, for Martin Buday, he doesn't have to be more athletic than, Andre Arlovski in his prime. He has to try and be more athletic than Andre Arlovski at 45 years of age. And that is why this fight is competitive, right? At their prime, I think Andre Arlovski just dog walks this guy, right? Just absolutely embarrasses him. But late career Arlovski is close decisions. He's getting knocked out by Tontel Mays. He's getting submitted easily by Marcos Rogerio de Lima. He's getting taken down and submitted by Aspinall, in a blink of an eye. Waldo Cortez Acosta is out there putting on a stinker of a fight and still beating him. So I haven't been very impressed by Andre in his recent run, but we know, based on what we've seen, that if it's a close decision, they will try to give it to Arlovski, whether he deserves it or not. I thought he beat Jared Vandera. I thought he lost to Jake Collier. The Carlos Felipe fight was really close. Chase Sherman, I thought he probably won that one. Tanner Boser, I thought he lost that fight. It's a unanimous decision. I thought he lost that fight. Felipe Lins, it's a unanimous decision win for Arlovski. Hats off to him. But then when he fights people with power, things go sideways, right? Jair Senior Rosenstreich knocked him out. Tontel Mays knocked him out. Marcos Rogerio de Lima submits him. Tom Aspinall submits him. Augusto Sakai loses a split decision. Walt Harris fight overturned to a no contest. I think Walt Harris pissed hot for that one. And then in any case, Francis Ngannou knocked him out. Josh Barnett rear naked choked him in the third round. Head kick and punches from Alistair Overeem. First round knockout from Stipe Miocic. This guy has just been through the ringer. He's 45 years of age. He's had 23 professional MMA, 23 UFC wins is what I meant to say. He's had 50 plus professional fights. Like, the guy has just been around forever. And so ultimately, I respect Arlovski, and I think he's a legend. If you have to quantify a money line side, maybe the money line side is Andre Arlovski, because if it's a close decision, it might just go his way on merit. But when I'm looking at Martin Buday, they're trying to get him back on track here, giving him a winnable enough fight against an older veteran. And this is a rebooked fight. They were supposed to fight at a fight night card in June. They pushed it back a couple weeks, and this could always be the last fight ever for Andre Arlovski, right? Like, Andre is always going to be in a position where he could retire at any time. He's 45. He's done this a million times. He just keeps getting, huge paychecks to show up for these fights. So, hey, I don't blame him. I would too, but I don't know how much he really wants to be there. I don't know how much he wants to win. I don't know how much he wants to compete. And meanwhile, Martin Buday just got embarrassed, right? He just went out there and got finished by Gaziev and made to look unimpressive. But Gaziev and Juan Espino are his only two losses, and both those guys are competent wrestling and grappling. Buday, I believe, is a brown belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and I think that, if Buday is able to get this to the ground, it's probably going to be step 1, step 2, step 3, and it's over. We have not seen Arlovski with any kind of resistance on the ground in his recent fights. So I think if this fight hits the ground, it's probably over. If it doesn't hit the ground, it's probably going to be gross and competitive. But ultimately, just give me Buday as the younger fighter who's in a little bit more primed shape and probably going to get the right supplement routine. He's 13 years younger, same size as Arlovski. I think he's going to get the win here, but I'm not blown away by Buday as a prospect. I just think that Arlovski's time has come and gone in the sport. Next up, guys, we got Carlos Hernandez taking on Ray Tsuruya. Tsuruya. I'm going to have to work on that name. I just got to tell you guys, I've not watched very much tape on Ray Tsuruya either this week. So another guy I've got to familiarize myself with before we get on tomorrow. So I'd be happy to do that. I'm going to come back armed with more knowledge and information, but he got a win on the road to UFC over a couple guys that I certainly wouldn't rate as UFC level talents, right? Mark Climaco, 10-2 as a professional out of AKA, but he had lost a couple times before. He's still a guy trying to work his way up, has a lot to prove as a professional at 26 years of age. So nothing wrong with that win, but again, a guy that hasn't proved that he's at this UFC level yet. He also beat 13-4 Jinusie. I'm doing my best with names, so if I butcher these at all, I apologize. But that guy went 2-2 on the show. He lost his other road to UFC matchup as well. Lost a couple other decisions in his career. So I think of this as a interesting fight where you've got a Japanese prospect here with a lot to gain. He's on a 10-fight win streak, pro and amateur, 9 fights as a pro. He's won all those fights. And Carlos Hernandez, he's had a tough time in the UFC. But you look at the quality of opposition, guys. Loses to Alan Nascimento. I mean, Alan Nascimento is one of the best grapplers at 125 pounds. 15-0 career to the submission, just a sensational record. And he beat Jake Hadley. He's 2-1 in the promotion. He lost a split decision to Takeru Lambekov. There is absolutely nothing wrong with Alan Nascimento. He's a talented fighter. Tatsuro Taira. He's my boy. You guys know, love the guy, think he's a beast. And I think that when you look at Tatsuro Taira, he's one of the top prospects at 125 pounds. He's much more proven, fought much tougher competition than Tsuruya. So again, could Tsuruya be the goods? Absolutely. I just think he needs to prove it a little bit more before we give him this kind of credit and respect. Meanwhile, on the other side, Denise Bondar got technically finished in the 3rd round. I don't give a shit if a technical decision on Tapology. He got technically finished. It was a horrible referee's error. He got slammed on his head. And when you look back, right, you see that Carlos actually, well, he was taken down. I got to stop you there, Capping Service. He was taken down, but he was attempting his own takedown. He just got countered on a takedown attempt. So it was a mistake probably to attempt an offensive takedown, but I believe he got taken down. If my memory serves, I'll go back and look at that, but I'm like 99% sure from memory. Carlos went for a dumb toss and landed on bottom. Yeah. So exactly. I think he got a little over aggressive there, but it showed his confidence, right? He was willing to go out there and try and compete with Taira in the grappling. I think that was ultimately a huge mistake, right? And I think that on the feet, we saw Taira, show himself to have the power, the speed, the skill to finish. But ultimately, a lot of the damage had been done, right? Hernandez had already been beaten up with elbows on the ground a lot in that fight. So when I'm looking at this fight, I say to myself, okay, Denise Bondar went to absolute war with Carlos Hernandez. Carlos Hernandez got the win. And that was a guy with way more MMA experience, right? 20 professional bouts. Victor Altamirano, another guy who's, stuck around at the UFC level. He's not special, but he's fine. And they went to a competitive fight. Carlos Hernandez gets the win. Daniel Bades, another guy who's sound, right? UFC quality guy. Maybe just like fringe level, but hey, he's got some abilities. And again, gets the win. Split decision, close fight. So now I just don't understand why he's such a huge underdog here. He comes from a great gym, right? Valley Flow Striking Academy. I believe Yair Rodriguez, Bilal Muhammad, a lot of very talented fighters. Ricardo Lamas have come through that gym. I just don't want to throw away Carlos Hernandez because he lost a couple of fights. I mean, he had 28 bouts, professional and amateur, before he ever got stopped with strikes, and it was against Tatsuro Taira. So, again, we'll give him a free pass for that one. Getting submitted by Alan Nascimento, 15-0 career to the submission. Hey, you know what? You're going to have to write that one off as, as a tough guy, a very high-level fighter, and it just didn't go your way that night. But meanwhile, Tsuruya, I think, is a quality prospect. I think he's got, a lot of upside. I do think he's going to win plenty of UFC fights. But we've seen before, how many guys underperform in a UFC debut? How many people go out there and just can't quite get, to where they're trying to go on that first time out? And there's a lot of expectations. There's a lot of pressure. It's International Fight Week. He's a good fighter. Maybe he goes out there and gets the win. But for me, I'm leaning towards a dog or pass situation at the betting odds, right? Minus 400, I just think is a little bit too presumptuous for a UFC debutante. And last but not least, guys, the first fight of the night, we've got Ricky Simón taking on Vinicius Lockdog Oliveira. And I think that Vinicius Lockdog Oliveira is a fascinating addition to this bantamweight division. I truly believe that Bernardo Sopai is a good fighter, and he's very talented. He's got a lot of skills. And unfortunately for him, he came into the short notice fight, and it was going well, and then everything fell apart, right? He had some grappling success. He was getting to some good positions, but ultimately you saw Lockdog continue to fight through. He didn't give up on himself. He didn't quit on himself. And what he was able to do is he was able to turn the tables on him, right? And then later on in the fight, he got his paybacks, and he started landing those calf kicks. He started landing big shots. He started getting off with his, offense. And I don't know what's going on in the chat today, but the chat is completely off the rails. Guys, if it's not about fighting, keep it somewhere else. Please, for the love of all things holy, let's just keep it on fighting. Any fight talk is good. Any fight talk is welcome, but just beefing in the comments, just show love, right? You don't have to love everybody, but if you ain't got something lovely to say to them, just fuck off and keep it to yourself. That's all. We try and spread love here. But in any case, guys, when we're back to this matchup, right? Sopai was on a 3-fight win streak. His only losses were close, competitive decisions against other talented fighters on the regional scene. And he was coming out of, I believe All-Stars Sweden. I can't remember off the top of my head, but I believe he's another one of these guys from All-Stars, right? And so we just saw another kid from All-Stars come in and look sensational in a debut. Cash that plus 1,300 with that sub of Naimov, right? So these guys sometimes are ready-made prospects, even in these short notice debuts. But in that case, Sopai just gassed out. He was having success. He was, getting to a couple good positions. But ultimately, we saw Lockdog Oliveira. He's never been submitted before. 2-0 career to the submission. He's been knocked out in all 3 losses. But then you look at the quality of opposition. Ali Taleb, a 10-1 professional out of Sweden. He lost that fight via TKO in the 3rd round due to punches. He lost to Adriano Ramos, who was 9-3 at the time. He's now 13-5 as a professional fighter. Lost via KO1. And then Christian Quinones, a UFC level fighter, lost to him way back in the day on the regional scene. And I think that overall, he's fought quality guys. Victor Madrigal, 13-3. Bernardo Sopai, 11-2. Hikaru Yoshino, 12-2. Sylvester Chimfubu, 7-3. Xavier Aloui, 12-3. Sultan Zodoleshbek, 14-1. Furtabek Yokubov, 6-1. Kayona Batista, 11-3. Leo Alves, 7-3. So I'm not saying that all of these are household names. Far from it, right? But he's been in there fighting real guys, quality guys, going all around the world to do it. He fought in Future FC. He fought in UAE Warriors, and then he made it to Contender Series. He fought in the Rio Regionals. This is a guy who's worked his way up. And I believe that Lockdog Oliveira is putting himself in a position to succeed. I follow this guy on Instagram. I've been watching what he's been up to every day. Basically, he's posting videos of him running. He's posting videos of him out there training. He's posting videos of him out there putting in the work. And he seems like an extremely confident guy. He's very violent. He's got a great knockout on his resume already. And I believe that this is a guy who is going to win UFC fights, period, point blank. So if it's not this one, I think he's going to win other UFC fights. He won on the Contender Series. He's 1-0 in the UFC. So it's not like he's got a debut stunt to pull, And meanwhile, let's talk about Ricky Simón, a talented guy, a guy who's got a lot of UFC experience, 8-4, very reputable record in the promotion. But He's coming off of a grappling loss against Joao Miao. He got heel hooked in the first round. There's literally no shame in that. That was in karate combat. But he also got decision by Mario Bautista in the UFC. Then he gets TKO'd by Song Yadong in the 5th round back in last April. So last April, he gets beat. Then he goes and the redemption against Mario Bautista just doesn't materialize, right? Bautista, who's got way less experience than him, was able to go out there and best him, was able to go out there and figure it out. And when you're looking at this guy, Vinicius Oliveira, he has a similar amount of pro fights. He's just been doing it in quiet, in obscurity. Ricky Simone's been doing it at the UFC level, and he's been taking a lot more damage over the course of his career. He got finished by Uriah Faber, got knocked out. He got rear naked choke by Anderson Dos Santos way back in 2016. He got beat by Rob Font. He took some damage in that fight as well. That was a competitive one, though. I'll give it to him. And then Mario Bautista took some damage in that fight, but he was competitive there. Song Yadong, Song Yadong did so much damage. And honestly, Ricky just looked out of it from pretty early on in that fight. In terms of like chances that he was going to win, he just looked like a guy who was breaking mentally and physically with the pressure, the power, and the aggression of Song Yadong. And for me, Lockdog just has a lot of those same qualities. You know, he might get taken down in the early going, but he's strong. He's physical. He's not easy to submit. He works his way back up. He's got power in those hands. He can explode on you. And he's got a lot of pro experience. So for me, I just think that right now, the momentum, the upside, the physicality, the durability, give me Lockdog Oliveira to surprise people. And I think he might finish this fight. It's going to be a tough one. I respect Ricky, but you know, Ricky's lost 2 fights in a row and he gets a lot of credit and respect at the betting window. But for me, you know, you get this Brazilian kid who's hungry, wants to be here, working his way up. Still a ton left to prove, full of piss and vinegar, 28 years of age. I think he might come in here and surprise people. So fun fight. And I'm leaning towards the dog in that first one. There you have it, guys. We have gone through my entire first look at the card. If you enjoyed this, if you enjoy these kind of breakdowns, do me a couple quick favors. First and foremost, guys, drop a like on this video. It means the world, helps out, right? Helps other people find the show. Also, if you're new here, get subscribed to the show. If you've been a long-time watcher, but you're not a subscriber, get on board, subscribe to the channel, helps the channel grow, also helps you find this content. It doesn't always get pushed to your feed, right? But if you subscribe, if you hit that notification bell, every time we go live, you won't have to ask me, Liam, are you live? You'll know Liam is live right now and ready to discuss the fights. I appreciate everybody who's a part of the sharpest chat in the game. Y'all were on fire today. Capping Service, one of the best third-party tracked bettors that's going right now in the MMA space. Go check out for yourself. He's doing great work. Appreciate him being in the chat tonight. Appreciate all the people that are rocking with us. Guys, also want to say this. If you have questions, comments, concerns, if you have things that you want to follow up with, go ahead and fire those off in the comment section down below. If I don't get to it before the fight time, after these events wrap up, I try and go back through and answer all of the comments, guys. So if you have long-term process questions, if you have short-term matchup questions, whatever you got, go ahead and fire those off in the chat. Otherwise, guys, I'm going to be taping. I'm going to be taking some notes. I'm going to be writing up a lot of my thoughts. I'm going to be going through and digging through the markets. I'm going to be posting all that information on Patreon between now and tomorrow. I already have a bunch of information up there. I already have one bet on this card already locked in for a few days now. So I'm excited overall about this event. I think there's a lot of betting opportunities. I've been waiting for the full prop menu to open up to dive in and dissect it all. And, you know, I think that between now and tomorrow's bets and banter, I'm going to place a few more bets. That's what I'll say because I'm feeling bullish. I'm feeling froggy, and it's time to leap on some of these good numbers. So God bless you all. I hope that you've enjoyed the show. If you have, like I said, the easiest ways to support, like the show, get subscribed to the channel, show a little love in the comments section, ask a question, right? And last but not least, guys, you can find me everywhere on social media at LiamPicksFights. I try and tweet out relevant stuff about fighting. I try not to bore you guys with much all else. So there you have it, guys. If you have anything more that you're looking for, it's probably linked down in the description below. Want to shout out our sponsor one last time, Fight Numbers. If you guys are looking to invest in your information, if you're looking to give yourself another resource to help you win, if you're looking for sharp information, sharp feedback, you know, from proven long-term winners, I think that Fight Numbers has a lot to offer respected bettors, whether you're an originator, whether you're looking for sharp guys to tail, all of that, they have options for you. So Liam is the promo code that you use. 30% is what you will get off that subscription. So guys, thank you all very much for the support. God bless you all, and come back tomorrow because we're having all the same fun again. Thanks, everybody. See you soon.